The lie of a fresh start. You pack your things, close the door behind you, and tell yourself this is it, your fresh start. New city, new job, new life. You walk through unfamiliar streets, inhale unfamiliar air, and try to convince yourself that what came before no longer matters. That you can shed the past like old clothes, that the weight you carried won't find you here. But it does. Not all at once. It trickles in quietly. The way you avoid eye contact when you're nervous. The way you smile too quickly to be sincere. The way certain words catch in your throat, as if trying to stop you from pretending you've changed. The past doesn't knock on the door. It's already inside. And soon you realize the cruel truth. You brought yourself with you. The idea of a clean slate is comforting. It tells us we can leave the mess behind, reinvent who we are, and rewrite the story. But identity doesn't reset. It seeps. It leaks through every gesture, every hesitation, every unconscious decision made in a new place that still echoes old patterns. You can move across the world and still trip over the same ghosts. Even memory conspires against you. You remember your old life selectively, editing, reshaping, re-narrating. You start to build a version of yourself you can live with, not one that reflects what actually was. And yet the body remembers. So do habits. The nervous system doesn't believe in fresh starts. It believes in survival. And what helped you survive before, those defenses, those detours, those masks, come rushing back the moment uncertainty returns. Sometimes, the more you run from yourself, the more tightly you're bound to what you tried to escape. You may repaint the walls, change your wardrobe, even pick a new name, but the same scripts play out, the same fears bloom under different light. You tell yourself this time will be different, but it never is, not because you don't want it to be, but because you've mistaken scenery for self. Real change doesn't come from erasing the past. It comes from integrating it, from seeing the whole mess clearly and choosing to respond differently, not elsewhere, but here inside the very moment you once would have fled from. But that's not the lie we're sold. We're told to reboot, to start over, to disappear and reappear better. We're told that transformation is a costume change, a location swap, a decision made once and made cleanly, as if the past can't leak through cracks in the pavement, as if shame doesn't have a map. And maybe we buy into it because it's easier than admitting the real work isn't glamorous. It's slow, it's repetitive, it's invisible. It doesn't look like progress. It looks like failing slightly less each time. But here's the darkest part. Even when you do change, even when something inside you finally shifts, the world around you might not notice. People don't greet the new you. They expect the old one. They look for the person they remember. And without realizing it, you begin to perform again. Not because you want to lie, but because it feels safer than having to prove you've changed. And that's when it hits you. Maybe you never really stopped performing at all. Everyone is always performing. You catch yourself adjusting your voice mid-sentence, smiling when you don't feel it, saying it's fine when it absolutely isn't. And for a second you wonder, who is this for? The truth is uncomfortable. You're always performing. Not in the theatrical sense. There's no spotlight, no stage, but there's a subtle choreography to everyday life, a silent agreement to pretend, to edit, to conceal. Even when you think you're being yourself, you're being a version that feels safe enough to show. You laugh a little louder in groups. You soften your opinions depending on who's listening. You pick clothes, words, even facial expressions like props from a character sheet. And the character depends on the audience, friend, boss, stranger, lover. It changes shape so smoothly, you barely notice it's happening. But deep down, a part of you does. You feel it when you're finally alone, and the silence doesn't feel like peace. It feels like aftermath, as if you've just stepped off stage and don't quite remember the lines you spoke. You replay conversations, analyze how you came across. Did they like you? Did you sound smart enough? Did you overshare? And beneath all those questions is the real one. Who was I just now? This isn't deception. It's survival. From the moment we're children, we learn that acceptance is earned through performance, that certain parts of us are more lovable than others. We study the rules, even if no one ever teaches them directly. Don't cry too much. Don't be too loud. Be easy to like. Be what they want. So we split. We create a social self, cleaner, simpler, easier to digest. And we feed it to the world, piece by piece. Over time, we forget what the original was. Or maybe we never knew. The real danger isn't that you're pretending. It's that the mask starts to feel like skin. You begin to believe in the image you project, even as something quieter inside you feels off. You chase applause, not because it feels good, but because it proves you exist, that this version of you is real enough to be seen. And sometimes, you find someone who seems to see through it, someone who says, "You don't have to perform with me." And for a moment, it feels like relief, but then a strange panic creeps in. If I drop the act, will they still care? You might try to be raw, open, real, but even that becomes a performance. Vulnerability turns into aesthetic. Authenticity gets curated. And just like that, the stage resets. The script rewrites itself. There's a haunting thought buried here. Maybe the self we show is never the self we are. Maybe there is no final, unperformed version. Just layers, each one trying to be loved in a world that rewards illusion. And if that's true, what happens to the love we receive? What happens when the applause isn't for us, but for the mask we made? What if, beneath all the rituals of affection, all the promises and reassurances, the love we hold closest isn't what we think it is at all? Love isn't unconditional. You grow up believing love is a shelter, a constant, the one thing that won't be taken away. People say it without hesitation. "I'll love you no matter what." And maybe for a while you believe them. Maybe you say it too. But then it happens. You step outside the lines. You change. You confess something too raw. You reveal a piece of yourself that doesn't fit the role you were cast in. And the reaction isn't what you hoped for. It's hesitation, distance, silence. That's when it hits. Love may be deep, it may be fierce, but it's rarely unconditional. We say those words because we want them to be true, because we crave permanence in a world that doesn't offer it. But look closer. Even the purest love comes with unwritten contracts, expectations buried in silence. You must not change too much. You must not challenge too directly. You must keep being the version of yourself they fell for. Step too far outside that shape, and something shifts. A parent withdraws their warmth, not with cruelty, but with disappointment. A friend drifts, unable to accept your new beliefs. A partner grows cold, not because they stopped loving, but because you stopped being who they thought you were. These aren't betrayals. They're revelations. Love, for all its beauty, often comes with borders. Invisible until you touch them. We rarely notice the conditions until we violate them, and by then, it's too late. We try to backtrack, soften ourselves, shrink back into the shape that once fit. But it never feels quite right again, because now you know. You know that the version of you they loved wasn't the whole story, it was the edit, the performance, the mask tailored for comfort. And if love depends on maintaining that mask, is it love at all? This realization doesn't make love worthless. It makes it human. Unconditional love exists, perhaps in theory, in myths, in moments. But most of what we call love is tangled with fear of abandonment, of change, of being truly known. And so we love with conditions. Silently, subconsciously, we say forever, but mean as long as you stay familiar. And maybe the saddest part is that we do it to others too. You think you're open, accepting, but then someone you love grows in a direction you don't understand, and suddenly you're less available, less kind. You withdraw without meaning to, because deep down you were in love with a version, not a person. And now that version is gone. So we're left asking, what would it take to love someone without condition, to embrace the changes, the unraveling, the contradictions? Could we do that for others? Could we accept that for ourselves? Or does love, by its very nature, demand that we remain legible, comforting, contained? And if that's true, if love is something we have to maintain, protect, and constantly earn, then what happens when we finally open up, when we risk being fully seen? Because there's a truth few will say out loud: the more you share, the more they start to look away. The more you share, the less they care. You think vulnerability brings people closer. But if you peel back the layers and offer someone your raw, unpolished truth, they'll meet you in that space, with softness, with awe, with understanding. But slowly, painfully, you start to notice something else. When you share a little, they lean in. When you share a lot, they lean back. There's an unspoken limit, a social ceiling on honesty. You can talk about your anxiety, but not the part where it makes you freeze in public. You can admit you're sad, but not that some days you wish you didn't exist. You can mention childhood trauma, as long as it's been healed, packaged with a lesson and a silver lining. But if you're still in it, still unraveling, still bleeding through your story, they start to shift in their seat. There's a cruel paradox hidden here. We live in a world obsessed with authenticity. We're told to be real, to speak our truth, to dismantle the masks. But when someone actually does, it makes people uncomfortable. Honesty in its rawest form doesn't feel noble. It feels heavy, awkward, inconvenient. And so the listener begins to pull away, not out of malice, but because your truth is too real. It reminds them of their own fractures. It demands an emotional depth they didn't agree to. And maybe worst of all, it breaks the illusion that we're all okay. It's easier to admire a scar than to sit with an open wound. You think back to the times you opened up, really opened up. The long message you sent, trembling before you hit send. The midnight phone call. The tears you couldn't hold back. You expected closeness. What you got was distance. They stopped replying. They changed the subject. They said something well-meaning that landed like a slap. Just stay positive. Everything happens for a reason. You'll be fine. And in that moment, you learned a lesson no one wants to admit. People love the idea of vulnerability more than the reality of it. There's a line between intimacy and burden, between sharing and oversharing. You never know where it is until you've crossed it. And once you have, something shifts. They see you differently now. Less inspiring, more unstable, less admirable, more too much. So you retreat. Edit yourself. Learn to package your truth in smaller doses. Filtered, digestible. You turn your breakdowns into Instagram captions, your grief into jokes, your existential fear into philosophical banter. And people respond again. They smile, they engage. But now you know they're responding not to you, but to the version of you that's safe. And that knowledge lingers, quiet, heavy. It makes you question every relationship, every compliment, every "I'm here for you." Would they still care if they saw everything? Because the more you share, the more you reveal, and the more you reveal, the more you risk becoming less human in their eyes, and more of a mirror reflecting truths they're not ready to see. But maybe that's the real danger, not what you expose, but how easily others can use it, twist it, weaponize it. And you'd never know until it's already being done. You can't spot manipulation. You think you'd recognize it. You imagine manipulation wears a smirk, that it slinks into a room like a villain from a cheap movie, obvious, arrogant, evil. But real manipulation is quiet. It looks like love, sounds like reason. It speaks in your voice, through the mouths of people you trust. It hides in compliments, in concern, in subtle rewards for behaving the right way. And when it hurts you, it does so with your own permission. You think of the times you've changed your mind, not because of evidence, but because of tone, a raised eyebrow, a shift in someone's energy, A quiet withdrawal of affection. No one said, do this. No one said, you must. But something in you moved anyway. You adjusted, smiled more, apologized first, and you told yourself it was your idea. That's the masterpiece of manipulation. It convinces you that control is freedom. You remember a conversation where you walked in sure of your stance and left agreeing with something that felt off. You couldn't pinpoint why. The facts were there. The logic made sense. But later that night, something twisted in your stomach. You realized you hadn't changed your mind. You'd had it changed for you. And still, you said nothing. Because what would you even say? That someone was too persuasive, too kind, too charismatic? That's not abuse, you'd be told. That's just influence. That's just human interaction. But where's the line? Between persuasion and pressure, between affection and control, between someone offering you comfort and using it to buy your compliance. There's no clear moment where it shifts. That's what makes it so insidious. The manipulators who ruin lives don't scream. They don't threaten. They drip their influence over time. Like water hollowing stone, they know your fears. They flatter your doubts. They offer answers when you're desperate and make you forget you ever had questions. And sometimes, the worst manipulation doesn't come from others at all. It comes from within. You convince yourself you're not being used. You rewrite memories to make someone seem kinder. You downplay your discomfort. You invent excuses for the pain. You want to believe you're immune, that you'd see it coming. But the truth is, manipulation works precisely because you don't see it. It's engineered not just to deceive, but to erase the feeling of being deceived. You won't notice until you're far from it, until you've escaped the fog and look back and realize how much of yourself was slowly rewritten. And even then, the hardest part isn't recognizing that someone manipulated you. It's realizing how much you helped them do it. Because if you can't tell when you're being bent, how can you ever know if you're still bent now? And once that doubt creeps in, your mind begins scanning everything, every gesture, every motive, every word that felt too smooth. You begin to wonder who's really on your side. And in that rising uncertainty, your brain does something ancient, something primal, something that has helped humans survive long before logic ever did. The mind invents enemies to survive. You notice a glance from across the room. It lingers a second too long. No smile, no greeting, just silence and eyes. Something in your chest tightens. A quiet voice inside whispers, "They don't like you." You tell yourself not to overthink it. Maybe they were just zoning out. Maybe they didn't even see you, but the feeling doesn't leave. It spreads, infects the moment. And before you even speak a word to them, a story forms about motives, insults, tension, betrayal. That's the thing about enemies. You don't always find them. Sometimes you create them. Not out of malice, but out of survival. Your mind is a threat detection machine, evolved over millions of years in a world that never stopped trying to kill you. Back then, paranoia wasn't a flaw. It was an asset. The brain that assumed there were predators in the dark was more likely to survive than the one that waited for proof. But the jungle has changed. The fangs are hidden now, in meetings, texts, silence, tone. And so your brain invents dangers to fill the gaps. Someone doesn't reply fast enough? They must be mad. Someone succeeds where you failed? They must be arrogant. A friend grows distant. They've replaced you. None of this needs to be true, but it feels true. Because the brain prefers conflict to confusion. It prefers a villain to a vacuum. And when the world feels uncertain, when you feel small, insecure, exposed, it becomes easier to imagine that someone out there is responsible for the feeling inside. And so, it begins. You scan for slights. You replay conversations. You hear insults between the lines. You armor up. You prepare responses to attacks that never came. You create an enemy. And the more you believe in them, the more real they become. You start treating them differently. more distant, more cold, more defensive, and they notice, and they react. And slowly, they become what you feared. Not because they were, but because you made them. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, one born not of hatred but of fear. Because deep down, the illusion of an enemy gives you something to fight, something to define yourself against, something to distract you from the more terrifying possibility that no one's out to get you and you still feel lost. So your mind sharpens shadows into weapons. It gives vague discomfort a name, a face, a motive. It builds a narrative where you are the embattled hero, righteous, alert, wounded. But sometimes, when the world quiets, the mask slips, and you see it for what it is. A projection, a defense, a wound dressing itself in war paint. Because when you don't know what to do with your emptiness, sometimes it feels safer to fill it with conflict than to face it alone. And still, part of you craves something gentler, something that soothes instead of threatens. But when you reach for it, you find something strange, something hollow. A truth your mind has always tried to hide, that even comfort, even reward, never quite feels the way it should. Nothing feels as good as promised. You wait months for it. The trip, the purchase, the milestone, the long-awaited yes. You imagine how it'll feel, the swell of joy, the tears, the finally. You imagine it so vividly that sometimes it feels like you're already tasting the future. And then it happens. You arrive. You open the box. You hear the words, and there it is. That moment. Only, it doesn't quite hit the way you thought it would. Maybe it feels good, even great, but not as vast, not as transformative as you imagined. The joy is real, but it's softer, thinner, shorter, like a song you waited a year to hear, only to realize it's already fading before the chorus finishes. And then, just as quietly, the emptiness returns. This is the strange curse of being human. The future always sparkles brighter than the present can ever deliver. It's not your fault. Your brain evolved to chase, to imagine better, to crave what's just out of reach. Anticipation is built into the operating system. That's how you survive. But in a world of endless rewards, it becomes how you suffer. The dopamine spike. It hits hardest before you get what you want. The fantasy. It burns longer than the reality ever can. And that's the trap. You mistake the fantasy for the feeling. You believe that the job, the house, the body, the approval, that thing will finally complete the equation. But every finish line just moves the goalposts. Every fulfilled desire comes wrapped in the quiet realization that fulfillment doesn't last. The upgrade starts to feel ordinary. The victory starts to decay. The longed-for person becomes just another part of the background noise of life. So you look for the next hit. Maybe it's the next project, the next relationship, the next improvement of yourself. A better version of happiness that surely must exist just over the next horizon. But no matter how far you go, you're always dragging yourself with you. The illusion isn't that things can't feel good. They can. They do. But the dark truth is that the mind doesn't let you stay there. Not because it's broken, but because it's built to want. And sometimes, when the good moment comes, part of you already mourns it because you know it'll slip away faster than you can hold it. Like trying to memorize the warmth of the sun or the sound of laughter in a dream. And the world around you, advertising, stories, culture, plays into this. It whispers promises of joy, of arrival, of enough. It teaches you that someday, someone or something will finally be the last piece of the puzzle. But there is no last piece. There is only the chasing, the reaching, the reimagining. And the quiet heartbreak of realizing that the things we strive for most are often less about joy and more about relief. Relief from fear, from loneliness, from feeling unseen. And that's when it hits you. Maybe what we want isn't things, or moments, or even people. Maybe what we want is certainty. Some invisible contract that says this will fix it. And when it doesn't, We don't give up. We just look for a better contract, a stronger promise, a new kind of deal. Most bonds are hidden deals. It feels like love or loyalty or something pure, a connection forged by shared memories, laughter, struggle. You call it friendship, partnership, family. You say, we're close, as if closeness is a kind of magic. But beneath the warmth, something else pulses. Unspoken expectations, unacknowledged trades, tiny negotiations no one wants to admit to making. You remember their birthday, and they remember yours. You listen to their problems, and they listen to yours. You keep their secrets. They stay on your side. You say yes when you mean maybe. They say nothing when they mean no. It feels natural. But deep down, it's not always kindness. Sometimes it's calculation, silent terms, invisible ledgers, carefully balanced. This isn't cold. It's not cruel. It's just human. Because every bond, at some level, is built on exchange. You offer pieces of yourself, time, attention, protection, flattery, and you hope to receive something back. Affection, security, understanding. Even if you never say it out loud, even if you convince yourself it's selfless, there's a part of you always measuring, am I giving too much? Am I getting enough? And when the balance tips, things start to shift. A friend stops calling, and you feel a flicker of betrayal, not because they owe you, but because the terms feel broken. A partner forgets something small, and it stings more than it should, because deep down, you feel like you've kept your side of the bargain, and they haven't. Sometimes, it's not even about what happened, but about what didn't. The message they didn't send, the support they didn't offer, the loyalty you assumed that turned out to be optional. And yet, most of these contracts were never spoken. They were implied, hoped for, assumed. We build them through gestures, through routines, through early kindness that become expectations, through tiny sacrifices we hoped would be noticed and weren't. And when the deal is no longer fair, the bond begins to rot. But here's the hardest part. We do it too. We withdraw when they disappoint us. Even if we never say why, we stop reaching out. We start pulling back emotional credit without ever saying the debt exists, because we don't want to seem transactional. We want love to be sacred, friendship to be pure, family to be unconditional. But humans are story-making, deal-making creatures, and even the deepest connections live in the shadows of reciprocity. Maybe the tragedy isn't that bonds are deals, but that we pretend they're not. We expect people to read our silent terms, to match our invisible sacrifices, to honor the contracts they never signed. And when they don't, we feel hurt, forgotten, used. Not because they betrayed us, but because they didn't play by the rules we never explained. And so we go on, building connections like glass houses, beautiful, fragile, and doomed to crack under the weight of everything we chose not to say. Because the truth is, most of what we call love is built on trust in a deal we hope is mutual. But sometimes, the ones closest to us are still strangers in disguise. You never truly know anyone. They smile. You smile back. You've seen that look 100 times, at birthdays, over late-night calls, in silent moments where nothing needed to be said. You know their favorite food, the songs that make them cry, the way their voice changes when they lie. You've shared secrets. You've held them when they broke. You've looked into their eyes and thought, I know you, but you don't. Not really, because behind every person is a maze, a private echo chamber of memories, regrets, unfinished thoughts, contradictions, rooms they've never entered themselves, let alone invited you into. You think you know someone because they tell you stories, but the stories they tell are carefully chosen, unconsciously filtered, each one smoothed and sculpted by years of telling and retelling, details left out, meanings rewritten, and the story becomes who they are, not because it's true, but because it's comfortable. And when you listen, you fill in the gaps. You imagine what you'd do in their place. You project your feelings, your logic, your fears. You don't see them. You see a version of them living in your head, one stitched together from fragments, smiles, texts, memories, tones of voice, a mosaic that looks like truth, but isn't. Even the people closest to you are strangers behind their eyes. They think thoughts they never share. They feel things they never confess. They act out roles, sometimes even with themselves, hiding pieces of who they are because they're afraid, ashamed, or simply don't understand it yet. You've loved people who lived entire secret lives alongside you. You've hated people whose pain you never noticed. You've misread tears, misinterpreted silence. You've walked away from someone you thought was cold, when really they were drowning. And you've done the same. You've shown only certain sides. You've hidden feelings, edited your past, laughed when you wanted to scream. And others took that version of you, the one you constructed for comfort or protection, and believed it was the whole. But no one is whole. We're all fractured mirrors, reflecting what we think others want to see, even as we forget what the original face looked like. To know someone truly would mean seeing every layer, the child they were, the ghost they carry, the roles they play for approval, the parts of themselves they haven't yet dared to face. It would mean peering past the smiles and silences and seeing the raw, unfinished thing underneath. But no mind can hold another entirely, not even for a second. And so all your relationships are built on approximations, close enough to feel real, never quite close enough to be real. This doesn't mean love is fake or friendship is hollow. It means they're acts of faith. You don't love people because you know them. You love them despite the fact that you never fully will. And maybe that's the beauty of it, trusting someone you'll never truly see. Still, sometimes late at night, you wonder how many versions of you exist in other people's heads. How many faces do you wear without knowing? And if even the people you love the most are unknowable, how long until even your memory fades into shadows? You're forgotten sooner than you think. You imagine you'll leave something behind, not just objects, but impressions. Moments that matter, a trace of your voice in someone's head, a certain smile they remember when the room is quiet. You want to believe your presence lingers, that the lives you've touched will carry pieces of you forward, like echoes that refuse to fade. But time is hungry, and memory is not loyal. You've forgotten entire days of your own life, conversations, dreams, thoughts that once felt defining. You've walked past faces you once kissed. You've reread messages you don't remember writing. You've looked at photos and failed to recognize the person you used to be. And yet, you believe you'll be remembered. The truth is more jarring. People forget quickly, not out of malice, out of necessity. The world moves, and to survive, the mind edits. It compresses. It lets go. What was urgent yesterday becomes irrelevant today. What broke someone's heart becomes a passing anecdote. Even grief, deep and pure, doesn't last the way you think. It dulls, shifts, hides itself under schedules and screen light and the quiet shuffle of everyday life. Sometimes you test it yourself. You scroll back through social media profiles of people who are gone, friends, classmates, distant relatives, and realize you hadn't thought of them in years. Their lives once ran parallel to yours, maybe even intertwined, and now they're like static in the background, blurry silhouettes in a dream you barely remember having. And that's just the people you knew. What about the billions you never met? The ones who lived full, rich lives, loved, lost, wept, created, and are now entirely erased. Their names unspoken, their stories untold, their entire existence reduced to forgotten footprints under the tide. Even fame can't save you. Most of the world's population can't name a single philosopher, emperor, or scientist from 200 years ago. The brightest stars dim quickly when there's a new sky every night, and even those who do linger in collective memory are reduced to caricatures. A quote, a tragedy, a bullet point. You think of legacy as permanence, but legacy is often just delayed forgetting. Still, you continue. You love. You try. You share pieces of yourself, not because they'll be remembered, but because it feels like the only real thing to do while you're here. You plant seeds, not knowing if they'll grow. You send signals into the void, hoping they land somewhere, anywhere. But eventually, the world will keep turning. Your name will be just another sound the wind doesn't carry. And maybe, strangely, that's not a tragedy. Maybe it's a kind of mercy, a reminder that you are free to live without the burden of being remembered forever. Because what matters isn't how long your name survives in someone else's mind, but how true you were while you had the chance. And still, in the corners of your awareness, something stirs. A quiet recognition that not everything you believe about reality is based on truth. Some of it is just repetition. Repetition that has worn grooves into your understanding. Familiarity, mistaken for fact. You mistake familiar for true. You walk through your home in the dark, touching walls you've never really looked at. You can find light switches without thinking. You know the creak in the third floorboard, the chipped paint on the doorframe, the scent of your own pillow. None of it surprises you. None of it needs to be questioned because it's familiar. And that's the trick. The mind is a pattern-seeking machine, built not to find truth, but to find safety. And safety often looks like repetition. If something feels like it's always been there, always worked a certain way, always looked a certain way, you stop interrogating it. Familiarity masquerades as evidence, as reality, as fact. It begins with simple things. Faces you've seen before feel more trustworthy. Ideas you've heard more often feel more correct. Stories that echo past stories feel more believable. Over time, the repeated becomes the remembered, and the remembered becomes the real. But what if the familiar isn't real at all? What if the way you remember someone isn't who they are, but a version you rehearsed until it's stuck? What if your beliefs are less about truth and more about comfort, ideas worn smooth by repetition like stones in a pocket? Psychologists call it the mere exposure effect. The more you see something, the more you like it. Even nonsense, even lies, especially lies that don't challenge you. Propaganda works this way. So does nostalgia. So does self-image. You believe you're a certain kind of person because you've told yourself that story so many times. You're kind, or anxious, or independent. But maybe you're just echoing what you've grown used to thinking. Maybe your identity is a habit, not a fact. And on a larger scale, this illusion runs deeper. Cultural myths, political systems, social norms. So much of what we accept as the way things are is just a loop of familiarity. We believe the economy works a certain way, that success looks a certain way, that history unfolded in the right direction, all because we've heard it that way since childhood. But familiarity doesn't mean truth. It means you've stopped looking. And this illusion has a dark side. It shields you from discomfort, but also from discovery. It whispers, "You already know enough." It keeps you in echo chambers. It dulls your capacity for wonder, for doubt, for change. You might even start to feel uneasy when something challenges the familiar, when someone speaks differently, dresses differently, thinks differently. Not because they're wrong, but because they break the trance. And breaking the trance feels like danger. So you retreat. You defend the known. You mistake the repeated for the reliable. But the deepest truths, the ones that shake you, rarely feel familiar when you first meet them. They feel alien, shocking, maybe even wrong, until they don't. Until they start to feel like they've always been there. And here's the twist. Even the idea that people care about what you believe, or how you change, or what truths you uncover, might itself be a comforting illusion. Because if we look a little closer, we may find that no one really cares that much. No one really cares that much. You're spiraling over something you said 2 days ago, maybe 3. A conversation that turned awkward, a glance you misread, a moment that clings like wet fabric to your thoughts. You replay it over and over, imagining how they must have seen you, judged you, labeled you, and you brace yourself for the fallout that never comes. Because here's the secret that never feels comforting. Most people aren't thinking about you at all. They didn't notice the crack in your voice. They didn't analyze your word choice. They didn't rewatch the tape in their minds because they don't have one. They were too busy starring in their own movie. Everyone walks around with their own storm of worries, insecurities, desires, projections, and in that storm, you're a background character, maybe even just a blur in the crowd. At first, that truth stings. You want to matter. You want to be seen, remembered, understood. But the more you sit with it, the more liberating it becomes. The world doesn't pause to assess your every move. Most people are too busy wondering how they were perceived to remember how you looked. And yet, you live under the illusion of the spotlight. You imagine your mistakes broadcast in high definition to a judgmental audience. You tiptoe through life, afraid of becoming a story someone else tells, when in reality, most stories never leave the mind they're born in. It's not that people are cruel, it's that they're occupied, distracted by their own survival, their own dramas, their own mirror. Even when tragedy strikes, attention has a short half-life. The world moves on faster than you think. A public embarrassment, a social stumble, even a deep personal loss, eventually everyone forgets. Not out of malice, but because forgetting is a function of life continuing. And this extends further than embarrassment. Your goals, your dreams, your grand plans, they matter to you more than they ever will to anyone else. That's not a flaw in others. That's the nature of subjectivity. You are your own epicenter. So is everyone else. But here's where it gets strange. Even though others don't care as much as you imagine, you still do. And the weight you carry, the regret, the shame, the longing, doesn't need their validation to feel real. It lives in you like a shadow cast by your own mind. It haunts even when no one's watching. And that's the twist. Just because the world has forgotten doesn't mean you've forgiven yourself. Just because no one's judging you doesn't mean you've stopped replaying the scene. Because regret doesn't ask for logic. It doesn't care about attention. It simply arrives. And once it does, it's hard to make it leave. Regret needs no logic. It begins quietly, like a cold wind sneaking through a closed window. No warning, no logic, just a sudden sickening shift inside your chest. You remember something small, maybe something from years ago, something no one else would even recall, but you do. And it claws its way back into your thoughts, sharper than it ever was when it happened. It could be a word you said too harshly, a friend you abandoned, a silence you let linger too long. The moment passes, but the feeling stays, like ink spilled in water, spreading into everything else. Regret doesn't follow the rules of reason. It doesn't care about fairness or proportion, or whether you were even the one at fault. It appears like a ghost from a forgotten room, uninvited, unprovoked, and immune to argument. You try to reason with it. I didn't know better. I was young. I meant well. They forgave me. But none of that erases the shape the memory has taken inside you. None of it silences the echo of who you were in that moment, how it felt, what it might have done. Because regret isn't about what happened. It's about the person you were when it happened. And sometimes that person feels like a stranger wearing your face, a version of you that exists nowhere but in that single instant, forever held in place. You might have moved on, built a life, grown into someone more patient, more kind, more aware, but regret doesn't care who you are now. It clings to who you were. It freezes that past version of you in amber and whispers, "This is also you." And no matter how many good choices you make, that frozen moment can still feel louder than all the rest. And the strangest thing, regret often survives even when no one else remembers, even when there were no consequences, even when the damage was invisible or minor or entirely imagined. Because regret isn't logical, It's emotional archaeology, a dig into old buried versions of yourself that you thought you'd outgrown. Sometimes it's over things you didn't do, words you didn't say, people you didn't stop. Other times, it's about the ones you hurt without knowing, or the chances you missed while waiting for a better time that never came. And the weight it carries has nothing to do with outcome. A harmless misunderstanding can haunt you more than a real mistake. A look, a silence, a hesitation, these tiny moments become anchors. They sink deep. You don't choose what your mind decides to mourn. And it doesn't let go just because you've learned your lesson. It doesn't fade simply because you understand yourself better now. It lingers, a scar you can't stop tracing with your thoughts. But here's the dark twist. Somewhere out there, someone else might be replaying a moment that involves you, and their version of it casts you not as the victim, but as the villain. You're someone's villain. You remember it differently, maybe even fondly. A chapter that shaped you, a time you grew, moved on, found clarity. But to someone else, it's the prologue to their private tragedy, one where you're not the protagonist. You're the shadow, the storm, the wound that never quite healed. It's a quiet horror, isn't it? The idea that somewhere, in someone else's memories, your name tastes bitter, that in their version of events, you weren't misunderstood. You were cruel, not flawed, but deliberate, not confused, but cold. And the strangest part is, you might never know. You think of the people who drifted from your life, the arguments that ended abruptly, the friendships that dissolved without a final word. You tell yourself it was mutual, that it just faded, that it wasn't that serious. But in someone's mind, that silence was a scream. That distance was betrayal. That casual comment you barely remember. It was a crack that split something important wide open. You wonder how many villains live blissfully unaware of their roles. Because most of us aren't cartoonishly evil. We're clumsy, self-absorbed, lost in our own pain. And sometimes that's all it takes. One poorly timed decision. One moment of cowardice. One night when we didn't pick up the phone. And just like that, we become a symbol. A name whispered with caution. A cautionary tale told to new lovers or therapists or late-night mirrors. The deeper truth is this. Your story is not the only version that exists. For every chapter you've rewritten, there's one out there written in ink by someone else's pain, and you don't get to edit it. You don't even get to see it. That version might have you framed in sharp edges, selfish, cruel, manipulative. And maybe they're wrong. Maybe they're coloring outside the lines. But maybe they're not. Maybe you were doing the best you could, but so were they. And your best, on that day, hurt them. You didn't mean to, but meaning doesn't erase damage. Intention doesn't dissolve impact. And so you carry this quiet uncertainty, not shame exactly, not guilt, but a strange ache that grows in the space between how you saw yourself and how someone else saw you. You'll never really know what version of you lives in other people's minds, but some of those versions are darker than you'd like. Some are still bleeding from wounds they've named after you. And even if you've changed, even if you're kinder now, those old versions still roam the past like ghosts, alive only in someone else's memory, yet heavy enough to shape your shadow. You want to believe everyone sees your goodness, that if they just understood you, they'd forgive. But that's another illusion. Understanding doesn't always bring peace, and some people don't want closure. They want distance, and even that is their right. So maybe the question isn't if you're someone's villain. Maybe the real question is how many times, how many unknowable roles you've played in the private myths of others. How many stories began with the line, "There was this person I once trusted." And just as you start to trace the weight of that, another truth waits quietly in the dark. The search for peace, real, lasting peace, is not about becoming perfect in every story. It's about letting go of the ones you'll never be invited to finish. Happiness can't be hunted. You tell yourself it's just around the corner. after the next promotion, after the move, after the weight is lost or the love is found or the debt is cleared. You make deals with the future like it's a vending machine. Feed it effort, discipline, time, and out will drop happiness, shrink-wrapped and certain. But it doesn't work like that. Because happiness, the kind that fills rather than distracts, doesn't arrive on demand. It doesn't respond to commands or calendars. And the more you chase it, the more it slips through you like smoke. The world trains you to believe otherwise. Advertisements sell it. Books map it. Influencers perform it. You watch others seem to have it, and you wonder what you're doing wrong. Maybe you're not working hard enough. Maybe you haven't found the right routine, the right mindset, the right supplements. Maybe, just maybe, it's still out there, waiting. But real happiness doesn't wait, and it doesn't live out there. It shows up, unannounced, in the moments between. In the breath you take, when no one's asking anything of you. In the quiet after the storm, when the dishes are done and the rain is tapping the windows, and for just a second, you don't need to be anywhere else. That kind of peace can't be hunted, because hunting is a kind of war. It assumes something is missing, that you're incomplete, that you must struggle to be whole. But you're not missing anything. You're overwhelmed, overstimulated, overpromised. The world constantly tells you that joy comes later, when the to-do list is empty, when you've earned it. But joy isn't a paycheck. It's a noticing. Happiness flickers in the margins, a laugh that surprises you, the taste of something you forgot you loved, a song you didn't realize still knew the shape of your heart. It doesn't last. No, but it wasn't supposed to. Its fragility is part of its truth. You can't chase happiness the way you chase success, because happiness isn't a place. It's a temperature, a hum. It visits when the noise dies down, when your guard drops, when you're no longer trying so hard to feel good. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe you've been trained to seek intensity, to crave highs and breakthroughs. But real contentment isn't loud. It whispers. And if you're always sprinting toward the next milestone, you'll run right past the quiet miracle of now. The truth is, many people will spend their whole lives climbing a mountain they think happiness lives on top of, only to find clouds, exhaustion, and the same old self. Because what you were hoping to find up there wasn't happiness, it was escape. And once you realize that, you start noticing how many of your smiles are rehearsed, how often joy is performed rather than felt, how easy it is to confuse relief for happiness and dopamine for meaning. You stop hunting, you start listening. And in that listening, something else rises to the surface, a gentle but haunting awareness. That even the memories of your happiest moments might not be telling you the full truth. Your memories lie to you. You remember how it felt. That day by the lake, the smell of cold air and pine needles, the sound of water lapping at the dock. You remember what you wore, what they said, how it all seemed perfect. But memory isn't a recording. It's a reconstruction. And every time you recall it, you don't just pull it from a shelf. You rewrite it, recolor it, reframe it, add shadows that weren't there, or light that never fell quite that way. You remember what you remember, not what happened. And the scariest part is, you don't notice. Because memory feels true, it arrives with confidence, with clarity, with detail. You see it like a movie in your mind, but it's a movie you've directed, edited, and scored without knowing it. That argument you replay on loop, the one where you said exactly the right thing, where they look stunned into silence, that might never have happened the way you think it did, or at all. Memories are fragile. They're shaped by your emotions, by your needs, by what you want to believe about yourself and others. They protect you, punish you. They don't just record your life, they narrate it. And every narrator has a bias. We forget what we forget. Entire hours vanish. Conversations are reconstructed. Faces blur, but instead of acknowledging the gaps, your brain quietly fills them in. Shamelessly, convincingly. It doesn't like not knowing, so it makes something up that feels true. That's how eyewitnesses get it wrong. How families fight over the truth of an old story. How trauma twists the timeline. Memory is a painter, not a photographer, and it paints with the colors you hand it. Even the core of your identity, who you think you are, is built on these half-truths and reconstructions. If memory is faulty, then so is the self built on it. You might have forgiven someone for something they never did, or held a grudge for something that didn't happen that way. You might carry guilt over a moment that memory distorted, or pride in a version of events that never really played out. But this isn't failure. It's being human. Your mind isn't trying to deceive you. It's trying to make meaning out of chaos. But sometimes, in its desperation to shape a coherent story, it creates illusions, ones that feel more real than facts ever could. And the more you rely on those memories, the more they become stitched into your identity, the harder it is to question them. To admit they might be flawed is to admit you might be flawed, that the self you think you are might be fiction. That's why when someone challenges your version of the past, it feels like a personal attack. Because it is, not against your integrity, but your story. You stare into the mirror of memory hoping to see truth, but the glass bends. It reflects not just what was, but what you need it to be, what you fear, what you wish. And in that reflection, something else hides, a mask you didn't know you were wearing. One that's been with you so long, it feels like skin. One stitched not from deceit, but from survival. A mask we call confidence. Confidence is a costume. There's a person you admire. Maybe they walk into a room like they own the gravity in it, speak like their voice was tuned by the gods, laugh like nothing could ever touch them. You wonder how they do it, how they carry that fire without burning up. But what if it's not fire? What if it's fabric? Confidence, for all its shine, is often stitched from uncertainty. A costume worn so well, even the wearer forgets it isn't skin. What you see as boldness might be a performance. What you envy might be a shield. Because no one starts confident, we start unsure, awkward, trembling inside our own skins. We build ourselves through trial and mimicry, watching how others walk and talk and win. And over time, we learn which masks earn applause, which postures feel powerful, which words silence doubt. But deep down, the fear remains. The imposter syndrome. The feeling that if anyone looked too closely, they'd see right through the performance to the mess behind it. And so we double down, we polish the costume, we play the part. You've done it too. You've smiled when you were crumbling, spoken clearly when your throat clenched, said, "I'm fine," when nothing was, and it worked. People believed you. Maybe they even admired you. Because confidence isn't truth, it's perception. It's the illusion of certainty in a world made of questions. That's why it's so magnetic, so dangerous. Some people learn to fake it so well, they gain power, influence, control. They walk with the rhythm of gods and speak with the certainty of prophets, and the world listens, not because they're right, but because they sound like they are. But others, they crumble beneath the costume. They forget how to take it off. They begin to believe that the only version of them worth loving is the one in disguise. And that's the tragedy. Because true confidence doesn't come from pretending not to feel small. It comes from being small and walking forward anyway, from knowing your fears, your flaws, your doubts, and choosing to act in spite of them. The costume has its place. Sometimes we need it just to get through the day, to survive a meeting, a heartbreak, a performance. But wear it too long, and you forget the shape of your own skin. You forget who you were before the mask. And yet, beneath it all, there's something beautiful. Most people are wearing one. The loudest, the brightest, the boldest among us are often hiding the deepest insecurities. And when you see that, when you realize that everyone is stumbling through this strange theater together, it becomes a little easier to be kind. But even kindness has its layers, its shadows, its secrets. And sometimes, when you peel back the smile and the helping hand, you find something unexpected waiting underneath. Kindness is often selfish. Someone gives you a gift, not because it's your birthday, not because you asked, just because they smile, say something sweet, and you feel a rush of warmth. You tell yourself, this is what goodness looks like. This is love. This is kindness. But then something strange happens. They expect something now, a smile, a thank you, a favor returned, or just a sense of emotional debt, subtle and unspoken. Suddenly, the kindness doesn't feel so clean. It feels like a coin already spent. This is the hidden truth behind so much of what we call generosity. We imagine kindness as a selfless act, a gift with no strings, a gesture born purely from compassion. But look closer. Look underneath the warmth. Trace the shape of the smile, the tone of the voice, the moment it appears. More often than not, it's not about you at all. It's about them. Being kind feels good. It reinforces identity. It makes someone feel like the better version of themselves. Generosity becomes a mirror, reflecting the story they want to believe. I am a good person. And that story is powerful, because few things are as addictive as moral self-image. When someone helps an old woman cross the street, when they pay for a stranger's coffee, when they offer emotional support at just the right moment, it can be genuine, but it can also be theater. An unconscious bid for affirmation, or even a way to control how they are seen. Kindness becomes currency. Sometimes it's traded for admiration, sometimes for closeness, sometimes for a sense of superiority. Look at me, doing good when others don't. But the most dangerous kindness, the kind used as leverage, it whispers, you owe me now. You can't criticize me. You can't leave. Look at all I've done for you. And this is where kindness warps into manipulation. Because when love is measured by how much someone gives you, time, gifts, effort, it becomes hard to tell what's real. You start to wonder if the kindness is aimed at your heart or just meant to decorate their own. Even parents can fall into this trap, showering a child with affection, but expecting obedience in return. Even friends can do it, offering support while quietly expecting loyalty, and even strangers who perform kindness publicly, not to change the world, but to be seen doing it. None of this makes kindness evil. It just makes it human. Most of us are walking contradictions, part generous, part selfish. We act with compassion and ego in the same breath. But it's the denial of that selfishness that causes harm. The refusal to admit that we sometimes do good things for selfish reasons, that we sometimes love the idea of being kind more than the people we're being kind to. Because when someone expects love in return for their performance, it becomes less about the connection and more about the mask they wear to earn it. People love the mask, not you. You walk into a room and they smile. You speak and they laugh. You share a story and their eyes light up, not for the story itself, but for the way you told it, your timing, your tone, your charm. You feel seen, appreciated, maybe even loved. But something's off, because the version of you they're reacting to isn't quite you. It's a shape you've learned to wear, a voice tuned to what they want to hear, a personality sculpted slowly over years of feedback, rejection, applause, and deep down you know it. You can feel the split, the space between the real and the performed. We all wear masks, but what happens when people fall in love with the mask and not the face beneath it? You start to wonder if anyone really knows you, or if they only know the version of you that fits their needs. The you who's funny but never too dark, kind but never confrontational, smart but never threatening. You become a collage of acceptability, stitched together by silence and smiles. And then, without realizing it, you begin to protect the mask. Because it works, it gets praise, it avoids conflict, it makes you feel valued, even if the value isn't directed at your true self, so you keep it on. even when you're exhausted, even when it starts to feel like you're living in drag. But the longer the mask stays on, the harder it becomes to take off. Because you fear what might happen if people see what's behind it. Will they recoil? Will they leave? Will they ask, "Who are you?" with a face full of confusion? So you keep polishing the mask, reinforcing the version of yourself that others seem to prefer. And soon something heartbreaking happens. You begin to love their love more than you love yourself. You crave the way they look at the mask, the compliments, the attention, the comfort of being wanted, even if it's not really you they're wanting. Even if you're a stranger behind the scenes, quietly screaming for someone to notice the difference. But very few ever do. Because people don't fall in love with your soul. They fall in love with what your soul can perform. They fall in love with their idea of you. And that idea is shaped by their needs, their wounds, their fantasies. You're the mirror. They're in love with their own reflection. And the saddest part, sometimes you are too. You love who you are when you're loved. Even if that person is just a role. Even if the applause is for someone else. You keep acting because the silence terrifies you more than the lie. But every performance has a price. And one day, you'll find yourself alone. No audience, no lines, no mask, just the raw, unfamiliar presence of your unperformed self. And you'll wonder how long it's been since someone loved that person. You'll wonder if they ever could. And just when you begin to reflect on how love can be confused with recognition, admiration, or even projection, a darker realization stirs. Because sometimes the things that hold our hearts don't just wear us down, they feed on us. What you love exploits you. You call it passion. That aching pull towards something or someone that lights your eyes from within. It keeps you up at night, fills your days with purpose, and gives the dullness of life a sense of edge, of gravity. You chase it. You shape your schedule around it. You let it dictate your mood. But somewhere along the way, it begins to feed on you. The job you once adored now owns your weekends. The person who made your heart race now quietly rewrites who you're allowed to be. The art you swore was your truth now demands you sacrifice more and more just to stay relevant. At first it felt like love. Now it feels like servitude. And you wonder, how did the thing that once made you feel most alive start draining the life from you? The answer is brutal, because love, true, full-bodied, obsessive love, is vulnerable to exploitation. What you love, you give power to. What you adore, you lower your defenses around. And what you need will eventually rewrite your limits. That's how it begins. You say yes when you should have said no. You stay late. Forgive too soon. Accept too little. You let others set your worth because your value is now tangled up in the thing you can't walk away from. You love it, so you let it hurt you. And the world knows this. Businesses know. They sell you identity wrapped in loyalty. Hobbies become hustle. Artists become brands. Causes become commodities. Love isn't safe anymore. It's bait. Because what you love reveals what you'll endure. A boss sees the sparkle in your eyes when you talk about your work and decides that's worth 2 unpaid hours every day. A partner hears your trembling voice when you say, "I can't lose you," and quietly stops trying. A platform watches how long you stay scrolling and designs its hooks just a little deeper. It's not that love is bad. It's that love is blind to what it costs. And when the price rises, most of us pay it without thinking. Because to stop is to lose, not just the thing, but the version of yourself tied to it. Who are you without your dream? Without their affection? Without your mission, your grind, your identity? So you keep going. Even when it's no longer love, it's maintenance. It's damage control. It's addiction, dressed up as loyalty. You perform the rituals of affection while quietly falling apart inside them. And in that fracture lies the cruelest truth of all. Exploitation doesn't always look like a trap. Sometimes it looks like a gift you're lucky to have. Sometimes it wears the mask of meaning while it empties you inch by inch. Until one day, you look around at the pieces you gave away, time, energy, softness, sanity, and realize they're gone and they're not coming back. You tell yourself it was worth it. But a small voice inside wonders, what if the thing you loved most was the very thing that erased you? And as that thought sits heavy in your chest, another begins to whisper, a deeper ache. Not for what was taken, but for what vanished before you even knew it had left. You'll never know what you lost. There's a silence you carry that you can't name, a hollow space, not loud, not sharp, just missing. Like the shape of a vanished tooth, your tongue keeps revisiting, hoping to remember what used to be there. You try to trace it, define it, but your mind slips past it like fingers searching for something in the dark. You don't even know what it is, only that it's gone. And the truth is, you probably never will. Not all losses arrive with sound. Some don't come with a bang or a goodbye. They don't leave a scar or a headline. They vanish while you're blinking, while you're busy, while you're pretending not to notice. These are the invisible losses, the futures you never lived, the parts of yourself you stopped feeding, the people who drifted before you even thought to hold them tighter. You mourn what you remember, but what about what you never noticed? The version of you who never said yes to that job, the friendship that faded before you realized it was the last call, the creativity that used to light you up, now quietly rotting in the corner of your mind, untouched for years. Some losses don't announce themselves, they just stop being. You can't track them, because the map was never drawn. You can't mourn them, because you never held them long enough to know what they meant. And yet, they leave weight. The quiet exhaustion in your bones, the low hum of dissatisfaction that haunts even your happiest moments, the unexplained ache at the edge of contentment. What makes it worse is how subtle the erosion is. A habit shifts, a dream delays, a conversation doesn't happen. You don't even notice. You're tired, you're busy, you'll get to it later, but later never comes, and years pass. And when you finally look back, the trail is cold. The person you were feels like a stranger, and the person you are feels unfinished. We like to think we'd know if we lost something important, that we'd feel it, fight for it. But sometimes the most important things slip through without resistance. They disappear in increments, in size, in silence. And you're left with a life that technically fits, but doesn't feel like yours. You'll never know what joke you didn't tell that would have changed everything, what trip you didn't take, what door you didn't knock on. You'll never meet the people who could have saved you, or broken you, or made you more whole. You'll never read the book you almost wrote, or fall in love with the person you never noticed at the exact wrong time. There's no closure here, no grave to visit, just a vague unease, like something was misplaced inside you long ago, and you've been living around the hole ever since. But then something else begins to stir, a quieter realization that maybe even your sense of self isn't something you built. Maybe it too was placed there, shaped, molded, not by truth, but by echoes you never questioned. Your opinions were installed. You'd like to think your opinions are yours, that they rose from experience, carved by thought, refined by time. But if you dig through the layers, really dig, you'll find fingerprints that don't belong to you. The songs you hated until your friends played them enough. The political beliefs that feel like common sense, but only because you grew up in a room where everyone nodded the same way. The brand you trust because it came with a jingle. The idea of beauty you carry because every screen you stared at whispered the same proportions. These aren't accidents, they're installations. Your mind is not a fortress. It's a sponge. And from the moment you were born, it's been soaking stories, rules, categories, right and wrong, normal and strange, worthy and not. You inherited reactions without knowing you inherited them. You carry judgments like family heirlooms, never questioning who carved them or why they were passed down at all. Some ideas wear uniforms and wave flags, and we see them as beliefs. But the most powerful ones wear plain clothes and walk past you like neighbors. They don't declare themselves. They blend in until your own thoughts start echoing them without resistance. By the time you're old enough to think critically, the scaffolding is already there. The categories have already been drawn. Certain questions are already marked as off-limits. Certain answers are already circled in pencil. You think you chose your stance, but did you choose what questions were even worth asking? That's the trick. Influence doesn't just tell you what to think, it tells you what to notice, what to value, what to ignore. Even your doubts were installed by the system that raised you. When you push back against one belief, you often do it using tools given to you by another. You break free inside a new box, wearing a different uniform, but the factory is still running behind the curtain. This doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're human. The self is porous, and the world knows how to slip through the cracks. Schools, stories, algorithms, they're all in the business of shaping your default settings. And most of the time, it works, because it's not done with force. It's done with rhythm, repetition, familiarity, until what was installed begins to feel like instinct. You still feel like you've built your worldview, but it's more like moving furniture around a house someone else designed. And yet, sometimes, if you slow down just enough, you catch it. A sudden hesitation, a flicker of alienness in your own opinion, a recognition that this belief you're defending so passionately might not have come from inside you at all. That feeling, disorienting as it is the first crack in the wall. The first signal that something deeper has been living in your mind, quietly deciding what matters. And once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. Because then, you start to wonder if this idea wasn't mine, how many others are waiting in the dark, how many silent architects shaped the very lens I use to see the world. You pause, unsure now which thoughts are echoes and which are your own voice. And that's when something shifts. Not loudly, but with weight. You begin to realize that the biggest moments of change don't arrive with fireworks or grand decisions. They sneak by in silence, hidden inside the ordinary. Key moments go unnoticed. You expected the big moments to feel bigger. You thought there'd be a sound, a shift, a sensation in your chest like history folding in on itself, that some subtle pressure would change in the air, alerting you that everything from this point on would be different. But when it happened, the moment that quietly changed everything, you were looking the other way, answering an email, laughing at something trivial, wondering what to eat. There was no overture, no spotlight, just a heartbeat passing unnoticed. You don't remember the exact moment a friendship turned cold, or the last time someone you love saw you with softness in their eyes. You can't pinpoint when the path you were meant to walk diverged, or if it ever really existed at all. You only sense later that something slipped, something passed. And whatever you were meant to become got edited in silence. That's the trick of it. We imagine that turning points arrive with thunder, that revelations come with music and clarity, that change taps you on the shoulder before it takes your hand. But most of life's hinges don't creak when they turn. They don't stop traffic. They don't leave marks on your calendar. They just move, quietly, invisibly. And you feel the consequences much later, trying to reverse engineer a moment you didn't notice, a glance you didn't return, a message you delayed just a little too long. A job you took without listening to the nod in your gut, a no that sounded too polite, or a yeses that came from fear. These weren't minor scenes. They were tectonic. But you missed them because they came dressed as routine. It's not your fault, entirely. The mind doesn't highlight truth. It highlights drama. It freezes the scene where someone shouted, but not the one where someone gave up. It replays the big exit, but forgets the small withdrawal that came months before. It clings to spectacle and discards subtlety, and so you move forward with the illusion of having noticed. But what if you're not the narrator you think you are? What if your life is full of pages you didn't write, edits you didn't see, meanings you only learned in hindsight? What if your memory is a movie stitched from guesses, stitched from moments the real you never even saw? It's humbling, this idea that your defining moments may not feel defining at all, that the before and after lines in your story were never underlined, that you're not the author watching your life unfold, but the character who only sees the plot twist after it's happened. And just when you start to process that, you realize you weren't alone in missing them, because sometimes you are watched, not just by your memories, but by eyes you didn't see, systems you didn't notice, people you didn't expect. And while you missed your moment, someone else didn't. You're watched more than you know. You lock your phone, but it's too late. The swipe, the scroll, the hesitation on one image longer than the rest, it's already been recorded. Your attention isn't private. It's a signal, a breadcrumb, a yes. Somewhere, in a server farm you'll never see, your data joins billions of others, forming a profile more accurate than even your closest friend could sketch. Not who you pretend to be, but who you are when you don't think anyone is watching. And that's the unsettling part. Because you are watched. Not in the dramatic, conspiracy-riddled way your mind might imagine. No trench coats. No surveillance vans. Just the invisible algorithms that study your rhythm, and the quiet eyes of people around you, observing, calculating, interpreting fragments of who they believe you are. You're watched by the way you fidget, the way you pause before replying, the likes you leave and the ones you erase. You're watched by strangers in passing, by coworkers noting your silences, by friends deciphering your tone. You're watched not with suspicion, but with projection, each gaze layering its own narrative onto you, reshaping you into 100 versions that live in other minds. You don't own your image, not entirely. It has fractured and multiplied, scattered through conversations you'll never hear, stored in screenshots you'll never see, remembered in moments you've already forgotten. You exist as a constellation of interpretations, some generous, some cruel, most inaccurate, but each one alive in its own way. Even your inner world isn't fully yours. Try sitting in total silence, doing nothing. Notice how quickly your thoughts drift to how this might look to someone else, as if an invisible audience were always perched behind your eyes, silently evaluating your choices. That's not paranoia, it's conditioning. Years of living in a world where performance blends with being, where identity is always half-staged. And maybe that's the strangest revelation of all. Privacy is no longer a location. It's a myth, one that crumbles every time you speak aloud near a listening device, every time your webcam flickers, every time your mind adjusts itself ever so slightly in the presence of perceived eyes. But what if some of those eyes are your own? Not now. Later, watching this moment through the fog of memory. Judging, cringing, wondering how you could have believed what you did, wanted what you wanted, wasted time the way you did. What if the most unforgiving gaze isn't the strangers or the systems, but your own, arriving from the future with no empathy left for the version you are now? And if that's true, then the next watcher you should worry about isn't anyone out there. It's the person you're about to become. Your future self may hate you. You picture them sometimes. Your future self. A little older, hopefully wiser, maybe with a better job, clearer skin, more stability, more peace. But beneath that optimistic sketch, there's a quieter truth that doesn't often get voiced. Your future self might not thank you. They might hate you. Not out of malice, but because of choices you made casually, comforts you chose over growth, patterns you refuse to break. You live your life in the present, moment to moment, but they're the one who inherits the consequences. Think about how easily you betray them. You scroll for hours instead of sleeping. You eat what numbs you instead of what heals you. You stay in situations that erode your spirit because leaving feels inconvenient. You don't do these things because you're evil or lazy. You do them because right now, in this moment, they don't hurt enough. But someone always pays. And that someone is them. You imagine that time makes everything better, that you'll grow out of your bad habits, stumble into wisdom, magically become the kind of person who does morning yoga and reads philosophy at sunset. But you don't just become that person. You have to build them. And if you're not building them, you're building someone else. And what if that someone else isn't kind? What if they're bitter? What if they wake up in a life they didn't choose but were slowly steered into, one postponed desire and ignored intuition at a time? They might look at old photos of you and feel a sharp resentment because they remember the moments when you knew better, when you could have said no, when you were aware of the trade-offs and still chose comfort over courage. That's the hidden cruelty of time. It keeps receipts. The past doesn't vanish. It accumulates in your spine, your finances, your regrets, your relationships. Every skipped boundary, every lie you told to keep the peace, every delay becomes a brick. Eventually, those bricks form a wall. Your future self has to climb, alone. And still, the world tells you it's all about the present. Be here now. Follow your joy. Don't overthink it. But maybe overthinking is precisely what's missing. Maybe your future self is screaming across time, not to scold you, but to beg, to plead for a little foresight, a little mercy, a little discipline, not as punishment, but as protection. So when you look in the mirror and whisper affirmations, ask yourself if your future self would agree with them. Would they thank you? Would they feel seen? Or would they feel like you sold them out for 5 more minutes of escape? Because sometimes the real enemy isn't your past or your present. It's the unnoticed force shaping both obedience to something you never meant to follow. You obey without noticing. You like to think you're free, that your thoughts are your own, your choices deliberate, your path self-determined. But watch yourself closely, just for a day. Notice how many times you move because something unseen nudged you. How many of your actions aren't born from intention, but compliance, silent, automatic, unexamined? You wake up at a time pre-decided by an alarm you didn't question. You dress in clothes that conform to an invisible script. You respond to messages not because you want to, but because you feel you should. You nod in meetings, smile when spoken to, say the right things at the right moments. Not always because they're true, but because they're expected. This isn't sinister. It's survival. You've been trained to play roles, to follow signals, to speak in tones that won't disrupt the flow. From childhood, you're taught how to sit, how to speak, how to defer. Don't interrupt. Don't stand out. Don't talk back. What begins as guidance becomes programming, and that programming becomes you. The strange part is how natural it feels. Obedience doesn't announce itself. It whispers. It dresses up as manners, professionalism, respect, routine. You don't even realize you're following orders because there's no one barking them, just architecture, norms, design. Ever noticed how you feel uneasy breaking rules that aren't real? Sitting in the wrong seat in a waiting room, staying silent when someone expects a polite laugh, not replying to a message immediately. That tension you feel, that's the grip of invisible authority. Not a person, a system. A set of unwritten rules you've internalized so completely you mistake them for your own voice. And when you do rebel, skip a day, say no, question a policy, you don't feel freedom, you feel guilt. As if you've done something wrong, but wrong according to whom? You can't always say. The lines are blurry, the judge unseen, yet the punishment feels real. That's the genius of it. The obedience becomes self-enforced. There's no need for chains when you build the cage yourself. You think your preferences are yours, but many were installed. Your desires, your fears, your goals, shaped by ads, by culture, by silent pressures you didn't sign up for. You're told what success looks like, what beauty is, what makes a life meaningful. And over time, you begin chasing those shapes without ever asking who drew them. It's not about becoming paranoid. It's about becoming aware. Because the most dangerous kind of obedience is the one that feels like freedom. The kind that convinces you you're choosing when you're really just reacting. performing, adhering. Sometimes true rebellion isn't loud or dramatic. It's the quiet act of asking, do I really want this, or have I just been trained to? Because until you ask, you won't know who you're obeying or why. And if that obedience is invisible, what about the freedom you think you have? How real is it? Really, if it comes with rules you're not allowed to see. Freedom has invisible rules. You cross a street when the light turns green, not because there's danger, but because the symbol told you it was safe. You stay in your lane, wait your turn, laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You choose your job, your clothes, your coffee order, and it all feels free. But dig deeper, and something unsettling begins to surface. Even your freedom follows rules. They don't come from a dictator. They're not printed on signs or enforced with batons. They exist in tone, in expectation, in silence. They are the norms that shape how you walk, speak, dream, the cage you don't notice because you've learned to decorate it. You think freedom means choice. And yes, you have choices. But like a menu designed by someone else, your options are already filtered. The flavors you're offered were chosen before you even arrived. And worse, you're taught to feel grateful for the variety, to believe that picking from the list is the same as writing it. Freedom is not the absence of control. It's the illusion of authorship. Consider how you behave in different places. At a funeral, at a party, at work. Your voice changes. Your posture shifts. Certain emotions become permissible, others repressed. It's not that someone told you what to do. It's that you know. You feel it in your spine, in the way glances linger or don't, in the subtle pressure to smile, to agree, to belong. Now ask if your freedom always conforms to context. Is it still freedom? The rules of freedom are not universal. They're cultural, historical, conditional. What one generation calls rebellion, another calls norm. What feels natural to you may feel oppressive to someone else. That's the trick. The rules hide behind comfort. If you don't notice them, it's because they were written in your language, installed early, like furniture you stopped seeing. And when someone breaks them, refuses to play along, it feels jarring, uncivil, wrong. Not because they hurt anyone, but because they disrupted the script. They said something you weren't supposed to say, dressed in a way that didn't match the scene. And deep down, it stings not because it offends your values, but because it reminds you that the rules exist at all. True freedom isn't about doing whatever you want. That's chaos. And even chaos follows patterns. True freedom starts with seeing the lines where they came from, who they serve, how they shape the way you live. It begins with noticing the quiet obedience you've mistaken for individuality. And when you do finally step outside the invisible rules, even for a moment, you don't feel empowered, you feel exposed. Because suddenly there's no script to follow. You're not safe in the comfort of should and must. You are untethered. But maybe that's the point. Maybe freedom, real freedom, isn't supposed to feel good. Maybe it's supposed to feel like a slow unraveling of who you thought you were. Like letting go of a language you never chose, just to hear your own voice for the first time. And when that voice speaks, when it whispers not what you were taught to want, but what you truly hunger for, you realize something haunting. Even desire can be scripted. Even longing can be learned. Desire is a script you inherited. You think you know what you want. The job, the body, the car, the love. You feel the pull toward certain things, status, adventure, safety, power, and call it your own compass. But the moment you stop to ask where that compass came from, it starts to spin. Desire doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's not spontaneous combustion. It's programming, repetition, imitation. You watched others long before you ever reached for anything. You absorbed their cravings like smoke in your lungs. You learned that some hungers were noble and others shameful, that some dreams were universal and others foolish. And somewhere along the way, you stopped asking whose voice whispered more in your ear. Every culture has its gods, And in modern life, desire is the god of gods. But worship it long enough, and it begins to shape your reflection. You want the body because you've been shown it brings power. You want power because you were taught it brings love. You want love because it promises safety. But no one tells you that safety is often the price of authenticity. And by the time you realize the chain of desires is a loop, you've already forgotten where it began. Watch a child before the world gets too loud. Their curiosity isn't efficient. They want strange things, unreasonable things. A pebble, a puddle, a sound. And they want them not for gain or performance, but for reasons too soft to name. But then the script arrives. It arrives through commercials, through praise, through quiet disapproval. Good choice, someone says. You'll be successful if you keep this up. Slowly, you trade wonder for strategy, play for productivity. You learn to want what's rewarded, to desire what's respected. And when you finally get what you think you want, there's a brief flicker of satisfaction, then silence, then the next want. Desire, when borrowed, never stays fed. The tragedy isn't that you were misled. It's that you were led so gently. No force, just applause. You climbed the ladder of longing with the whole world cheering, and only at the top did you notice the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. But you don't have to burn it all down to break the spell. Just stop. Pause. Ask yourself, why do I want this? Not the surface answer, but the one buried underneath. Ask it again and again, until your wants begin to stutter, until the script loses track of its own lines. Because under every inherited desire, there's a silence, a space where your own hunger waits. One that hasn't been sold to you or sold by you. One that might not make sense to anyone else. And when you finally taste it, not because it's trending or admired, but because it feels like coming home, you'll know you've found it. Your desire. But not everyone will see that as a revelation. Some will see it as retreat or rebellion, because in a world of performance, even silence can be misunderstood. Even stillness can be a threat. Silence can be performance. You say nothing, but that doesn't mean you're unseen. In fact, your silence might be the loudest thing in the room. You cross your arms in a conversation. You withhold a text. You nod instead of answering. And slowly, unknowingly, you craft a message. Not with words, but with absence. Because silence isn't emptiness. It's a shape, a choice, a signal carved in negative space. Sometimes you stay quiet to keep peace. Sometimes to hold power. Sometimes because the truth might ruin everything. But no matter the reason, the stillness speaks. And if you look closely, you'll notice not all silence is the same. There's the silence of control, where saying nothing keeps someone guessing. The silence of shame, where words feel dangerous, like they'll expose you. The silence of defiance, where you withhold not to protect yourself, but to punish. And then there's the silence that performs. A curated quiet, a pause designed to impress, a well-timed non-reply that says, I don't need to explain myself. But behind that silence, a calculation, a performance of mystery, of strength, of detachment. Social media trains us in this theater. We learn that saying less is seductive, that vanishing is a flex, that cryptic captions and aesthetic distance build allure. And slowly we start to treat silence like a costume, something to wear, something to weaponize. But the moment silence becomes performance, it stops being peace. It becomes pressure. A new language you must master. When to speak, when to disappear, when to withhold affection, so it looks like strength, not fear. And over time, this silence eats your voice. You want to scream but can't break the character. You want to cry but don't want to ruin the image. You want to be honest, but you've built your worth on being unreadable, so you keep playing the role. And the longer you do, the more people fall in love with the version of you who says nothing at all. But silence can be a prison dressed as poise. What if you spoke and your words fell flat? What if they weren't profound or cool or controlled? What if your silence was never powerful, it was just safe? Not all noise is distraction. Not all quiet is strength. Sometimes truth is messy. Sometimes it babbles. It trembles. It contradicts itself, but it's alive. And when you let it breathe, something shifts. You stop curating. You start connecting. And when someone truly hears you, not the image of you, not the shadow you cast in stillness, but the trembling, imperfect voice beneath, that's when silence finally becomes sacred. Not because it's strategic, but because it's real. But letting go of performance means letting go of control. And that's where things get hard. Because once the mask starts to fall, what's underneath doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes, what's underneath is you, raw, unfinished, unpolished. And the terrifying truth is, you can't undo yourself. You can't undo yourself. You can cut your hair, change your name, move across the world, burn the photos, delete the messages, unfollow the memories. But no matter how far you run or how hard you try, you carry it all. Because the past doesn't need a place to live. It lives in your reflexes, in the way you flinch when someone raises their voice, in the way you laugh to fill silence, in the way you avoid mirrors after a bad day. You try to start fresh, a new job, a new city, a new relationship, but it follows, not like a shadow. Shadows need light, more like gravity, unseen, constant, quietly shaping every step. There are parts of you you wish never existed, regrets you replay, versions of yourself you'd erase, if you could, that cruel thing you said, that thing you didn't say, the fear you let win, the love you let die. You convince yourself these are knots you can cut, as if growth means disowning who you once were. But here's the thing. Those versions didn't vanish. They didn't die. They folded themselves into your skin, became part of your voice, your instincts, your hesitations. And even if you bury them deep, they don't stay quiet. They whisper in dreams, echo in your choices. Sometimes they even drive. You want to believe in transformation, in reinvention. You read the quotes. You write the goals. You tell yourself the past is a story you no longer tell. But stories don't end just because you stop reading them aloud. They wait, in silence, until life hands you a moment that feels too familiar, and suddenly you're reacting like someone you thought you'd buried. This isn't punishment, it's architecture. You are a house built by every version of yourself, the proud ones and the ashamed ones, the brave ones and the cowardly ones. They all left fingerprints on the walls. You can repaint, you can rearrange, but the foundation remembers. The truth is, growth isn't erasure, it's integration. Healing isn't deleting the pain, it's learning how to live with it without letting it speak for you. Maturity isn't rewriting the past, it's holding it with gentle hands saying, I see you, you were doing your best, and now I'll do better. You don't need to undo yourself, you need to understand yourself. Sit with the ghost you're ashamed of. Ask it why it's still here. Maybe it has something to teach you. Maybe it's just scared. Maybe it's waiting for permission to rest. But as long as you pretend it doesn't exist, it owns you. We spend our lives trying to sculpt a self we can be proud of, not realizing that pride without reconciliation is just performance. Real peace comes when you stop cutting parts of yourself off and start holding them close without letting them rule you. And when you do that, something strange happens. The weight doesn't disappear, but it softens. The past stops chasing you and starts walking beside you. Not as a threat, not as shame, but as proof that you've been through fire and didn't vanish. You just changed shape. And in that stillness, just for a moment, you might catch a glimpse of something terrifying and beautiful, that what you deny might still be you. You are what you deny. You see someone act out too loud, too selfish, too needy, and you cringe. Not just because of what they're doing, but because something in it feels strangely familiar. You roll your eyes, distance yourself, tell others, I could never be like that. But the intensity of your rejection says otherwise. Denial isn't a quiet no, it's a door slammed shut on a room you forgot you built. And the more you hate what's behind it, the more likely it belongs to you. It starts early. Maybe you were told that anger is ugly, that crying is weakness, that needing attention makes you shallow. So, you buried those feelings, deep and fast, convinced they didn't belong in someone like you. You became calm, composed, self-reliant. But beneath that performance, the denied parts didn't die. You still feel anger, but now it leaks out as coldness, sarcasm, control. You still feel need, but now it hides behind jokes, behind silence, behind overfunctioning. You still want to be seen, but now you pretend not to care. And what you deny in yourself, you begin to hate in others. Their freedom becomes your discomfort, their messiness, your judgment. Because deep down you're not really disgusted with them, you're terrified they've given form to something you've tried to kill in yourself. Denial creates shadows, and shadows don't vanish. They distort, they twist your reflection into something unrecognizable. The more you exile your impulses, the more they control you from behind the curtain, quietly scripting your reactions, your attractions, your fears. You might say, but I'm not like that. And yet, how would you know? Self-image is selective. It edits out what doesn't fit the story. But every time you overreact, every time you project, every time you feel a pang of dislike that arrives too fast to explain, it's often a disowned part of you knocking on the door. And here's the strangest part. Many of the traits you most admire in others, their fire, their tenderness, their weirdness, may also live inside you. But if you've been taught to deny them, you'll never claim their power. You'll applaud from a distance, never realizing you're cheering for your own ghost. Wholeness doesn't mean being perfect. It means being willing to look at the parts of yourself that scare you. The needy part, the jealous part, the arrogant part, the part that wants to be loved so badly it would lie. Not to indulge them, but to understand them. Because what you deny owns you more than what you accept. And the only way out is in. You trace the edges of your discomfort, and suddenly a pattern appears, a hidden edit, not in others, but in how you see. A strange suspicion begins to form. Maybe you're not perceiving reality at all. Maybe you're curating it. You edit reality constantly. You wake up and scroll through your phone. A war, a wedding, a meme, a tragedy, a breakfast plate, all squeezed into a single stream. Your brain doesn't process it all equally. It can't. So it picks and chooses, stitches the fragments together into something that feels coherent, familiar, survivable. And just like that, the editing begins. Reality, as you experience it, isn't what's out there. It's what survives the cut. Your senses are filters. Your memory is a sketchpad. Your attention, a spotlight that leaves everything else in the dark. Even as you sit in a room, you're not noticing the weight of your clothes, the hum of the refrigerator, the pressure of your left heel, until someone points it out. Then suddenly, it's there, real, present. But it was always there, wasn't it? So why didn't you notice? Because your mind edits, ruthlessly, and it edits not for truth, but for story. You don't remember things as they happened. You remember them as you understood them, as they fit into the narrative of who you think you are. You highlight the moments that confirm your identity, mute the ones that don't. You make villains out of people who wounded you, heroes out of those who stayed, and sometimes you crop out your own role entirely. This isn't deception, it's survival. If you remembered everything, every humiliation, every contradiction, every unflattering angle, you'd collapse under the weight of it. So your mind chooses instead. It trims reality like a film editor trims hours of raw footage. It inserts music. It slows down the important parts. It cuts to black when it hurts too much. and it feels seamless. It feels real. But then something happens. A friend remembers the story differently. A photo resurfaces. A sentence you swore was never said plays back in a recording. And suddenly the timeline glitches. You realize the truth isn't what happened, it's what you believed happened. And this doesn't just apply to memory. It's in every moment. You see someone frown and assume it's about you. You notice a pause in conversation and fill it with meaning. You anticipate rejection before it arrives and call it intuition. But these aren't perceptions. They're edits. Edits based on old wounds, old roles, old fears. The scariest part? You don't notice the edits. That's what makes them powerful. You believe you're reacting to the world, but more often, you're reacting to a version of the world that's already been curated by your beliefs, your biases, your unspoken rules. You walk through a self-authored simulation, mistaking it for objectivity. And every time you insist, that's just how it is, you might be defending a cut you didn't know you made. You stare into the mirror of your experiences and wonder why it feels distorted. But maybe it's not the mirror. Maybe it's the editor behind the glass. And just when you think you've spotted the edits, caught the tricks, ripped through the illusion, you hit another wall. One far deeper, because it's not just what you've edited out of the world. It's what you've hidden from yourself. You lie best to yourself. You say it didn't hurt. You say it doesn't matter. You say you've moved on. And yet, late at night, when the distractions die and the stillness creeps in, something stirs. A sentence replays. A face flashes. A quiet ache you thought you'd buried knocks softly, as if to say, you weren't honest with me. But it's not someone else you've deceived. It's you. Because the most believable lies aren't shouted, they're whispered from within. You think of lying as a social act, something you do to manipulate others. But the most frequent, effective, and dangerous lies are the ones you tell yourself. You lie to avoid pain, to protect pride, to keep the story of who you are intact. You convince yourself you're over them when you still check their profile every night. You say you're fine with where you are while envying every peer who passed you by. You pretend the rejection didn't sting, even as it echoes through your choices. And these aren't acts of malice, they're acts of preservation. Your brain, it turns out, has no deep allegiance to truth. Its loyalty is to coherence, stability, identity, and if that means altering the story, revising events, erasing emotions, it will do so effortlessly. You'll believe you made that decision for the right reasons, that you weren't angry, that it wasn't your fault. Not because you're dishonest, but because you're human. We all carry a narrator inside, a voice that doesn't just report what's happening, but interprets it, spins it, filters it. That voice knows what you want to believe, and it wants to keep you safe from shame, from regret, from the terrifying ambiguity of not knowing who you really are. So it tells you a version of the truth, one you can live with. And the worst part? You rarely catch it. When someone else lies to you, there are signals, inconsistencies, micro-expressions, slips. But when you lie to yourself, the lie comes prepackaged with certainty. It feels like clarity, like logic, like memory, like fact. But deep down, there's a flicker, a static at the edges. The gut feeling you ignore. The moment you hesitate before defending your choice. The recurring dream where everything you suppressed finds a voice. These are the ghosts of truths you buried. And sometimes it takes a crack in the facade, a moment of raw honesty, a crisis, a mirror held too close for it all to rush back. You see how many of your decisions were rationalizations, how many relationships you stayed in out of fear, not love, how many ambitions were distractions from something deeper. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. Because the mind isn't built to handle brutal honesty all at once. So it feeds you truth in doses. And sometimes the biggest growth isn't discovering new insights, but admitting the ones you already knew and denied. And just when you start peeling back the layers, just when you catch yourself in the act of self-deception, a new realization arrives, quiet, unsettling, but impossible to ignore. Some of the lies you told yourself helped you survive. Success is survival in disguise. You look at someone successful and see power, freedom, confidence. You imagine they've unlocked something you haven't, that they walk through life untouched by the same anxieties, the same fears, but get close enough, and you'll often find something else, a quiet desperation polished into discipline, a frantic climb disguised as composure. Because for many, success isn't a celebration, it's a strategy, not to thrive, but to survive. That relentless ambition, it may have started as a way to prove someone wrong, to earn love, to matter. It didn't grow from abundance, but from a void. The straight-A student who had to be perfect to avoid punishment. The entrepreneur who builds empires to escape the shame of being poor. The overachiever whose trophies are armor, each one hiding the terror of feeling unwanted. We call it drive. We praise the hustle. But sometimes what we call ambition is a symptom, a defense mechanism wrapped in a dream. Because success, when you peel back the layers, often isn't about winning. It's about safety, about securing a place in a world that once made you feel invisible, disposable, or replaceable. It's why so many high performers feel a gnawing emptiness once they've made it. The applause fades, the bank account swells, and still something's missing. Because if you built your identity on being better, faster, richer, then rest feels like death. Stopping means being seen, and being seen means being judged. So you keep going, and society loves you for it. It rewards your obsession. It brands your trauma as work ethic. It packages your fear as motivation and sells it as inspiration. But what happens when the survival strategy works too well? You hit your goals, but they don't land. You get the validation, but it doesn't heal. You keep climbing, but the mountain never ends, because you weren't climbing toward a destination, you were climbing away from something. And the further you run, the blurrier that something becomes. It's easy to mistake movement for progress. But what if your success is just a loop, an elegant repetition of the same emotional pattern you started with, dressed up in titles and milestones? Maybe the hard truth is this: not all success is growth. Some of it is camouflage. Some of it is a beautifully designed escape route from your own vulnerability. But if you pause, really pause, you might begin to see the cracks. In the late-night overthinking. In the moment you reach a goal and feel nothing. In the way you're terrified to slow down because you don't know who you are without the chase. And in that silence, a new question emerges. If success is a mask, what are you hiding underneath it? Because when you stop measuring yourself by how far you've run and start noticing what you've been running from, another possibility appears. One not built on survival, but on wholeness. But to reach it, you'll have to face a strange danger. One that doesn't look like failure at all. It looks like ease, like stillness, like comfort. And comfort, despite its warm promise, has a hidden cost. Comfort kills curiosity. You wrap yourself in the softness of routine. The same chair, the same shows, the same path from bed to screen, and nothing feels wrong. In fact, everything feels fine. But that's the trap. Because comfort doesn't shout. It whispers safety, predictability, ease. It gives you just enough warmth to quiet the questions, just enough entertainment to soften the ache, just enough control to keep you from wandering too far. And in that stillness, something else goes quiet too, your curiosity. Not all at once. It doesn't vanish. It just stops interrupting. You no longer wonder how things work. You stop chasing why you feel hollow after a full day. You forget what it felt like to follow a strange idea deep into the night just because it wouldn't let you go. Curiosity is what cracks the world open, but it needs friction, hunger, discomfort. It needs the itch of not knowing, the tension of not understanding, and comfort numbs that itch. It replaces wonder with scrolling, confusion with certainty, adventure with convenience. We design our lives around insulation, climate control, digital filters, personalized feeds, everything tailored to reduce resistance. And with each new convenience, the world asks less of us, and we ask less of it. Why bother struggling to understand when you can Google it? Why question the story when it already fits what you believe? Why chase the unknown when the known feels so good? But a mind that stops reaching becomes a museum, silent, preserved, and slowly forgotten. Curiosity doesn't thrive on perfection. It thrives on tension, on being wrong, on walking into the unfamiliar and saying, I don't know, but I want to. It's the opposite of comfort, not pain, but possibility, the thrill of uncertainty, the freedom to unlearn. And maybe that's the danger, because curiosity changes you. Once awakened, it won't let you settle. It disrupts routines. It asks you to start over, again and again. It makes you uncomfortable in places you once felt safe. It forces you to face what you don't want to see, about others, about the world, about yourself. And comfort. It can't compete with that kind of truth, so it seduces you instead. It fills the cracks with entertainment. It dulls the edges with routine. It wraps the mind in a warm blanket and rocks it gently into quiet submission. But inside you, curiosity never truly dies. In that moment of silence between distractions, in the ache you feel when everything should feel fine, in the flicker of a question you almost chased, but didn't. And the world knows this. It knows how to keep you still, how to keep your eyes low, your hands full, your mind busy. It has an endless arsenal of comfort, not to soothe you, but to keep you from waking up. The world is a distraction engine. You open your eyes and the world is already waiting. Notifications blink, headlines scream, ads flash. Somewhere, someone is going viral for something forgettable, and before your feet touch the ground, your attention has already been claimed. That's not an accident. You live inside a machine built not for truth, not for depth, but for distraction. Its gears are algorithms. Its fuel is your focus. It doesn't care what you believe, as long as you're still scrolling. And it's good at what it does. It doesn't need to change your mind. It just needs to keep it busy. 1,000 tabs open, a dozen opinions half-formed, an endless buffet of dopamine hits dressed as information. News, memes, drama, outrage, each one tugging at your mind like a child in a crowded room, shouting, "Look at me." You were not born this way. You were born curious, slow, absorbed. You would stare at a raindrop like it held the universe. But the world trained you differently. It told you speed was value, noise was relevance, that silence was a void to be filled, not a space to think. The engine doesn't want you present. It wants you predictable. It wants your preferences, your habits, your fears, all mapped, all monetized. And the best way to control your mind is not through force, but through overload. Too many voices, too many updates, too many choices, so many in fact, that the only real choice left is surrender. You start letting the stream carry you, not because you're weak, but because you're tired. Because staying focused now feels like swimming against a current that never stops. And in that flood, the most dangerous thing is what gets washed away. Your inner voice. Not gone, just drowned, replaced by echoes, replaced by urgency, replaced by a kind of buzzing silence that keeps you restless but never awake. The world gives you 1,000 things to care about, all at once, and makes sure none of them go deep. Because if they did, if you really stopped, really listened, really looked, something might shift. You might remember what it feels like to be present, to think slowly, to question. And that would be a problem. Because real thought is dangerous. It asks you to peel back the layers, to step out of the noise, To realize how much of what you believe, want, and fear has been fed to you in bits and fragments until your identity became a collage of what the world needed you to be. You think you're distracted because you lack discipline, but the truth is darker. You're distracted because distraction has become the design. And the more distracted you are, the easier it is to believe that the shallows are the depths, that reacting is the same as understanding, that connection can be measured in likes and meaning in metrics. But now and then, a pause slips through, a moment unscripted, and in that flicker you notice something, a loneliness that wasn't there before. A feeling that even when you're surrounded by voices, no one is really hearing you, not because they don't care, but because they too are drowning in noise. You'll never be understood. You speak carefully. Choose your words like stepping stones across a river, hoping someone on the other side will see where you're trying to go. You explain. You confess. You open your chest like a book and point to the lines that matter most. And still, it's never quite enough. Because no matter how close someone gets, they are not you. They don't feel the storm behind your silence. They don't hear the years behind your laugh. They don't see the entire iceberg of thought beneath each small decision. At best, they glimpse the outline. At worst, they redraw you in their own image. And that's the paradox of being human. We crave connection, yet live inside a skin no one else can enter. You could spend hours telling someone who you are, and they'd still walk away with a version built from their assumptions, their filters, their needs, not your truth, their interpretation of it. You try anyway, because the alternative is loneliness. But even that loneliness is misunderstood. People mistake your quiet for peace, your calm for indifference, your boundaries for walls. And the more you try to correct them, the more you feel like a mirror being asked to reflect a face it doesn't recognize. It gets worse when you're in pain, when you're trying to explain why something hurts, not physically, but existentially, why certain words leave invisible bruises, why the past still echoes in the present, why you flinch when no one sees a reason. And they say things like, just get over it, or you're too sensitive because it's easier to dismiss what they can't comprehend. This isn't their fault, or yours. It's the nature of consciousness. A mind is a closed room with windows, but no doors. You can wave, you can smile, you can press your face against the glass and hope someone sees the real you, but they're doing the same thing from the other side. And sometimes, no one's looking. You try art, music, writing. You try metaphors and dreams and long midnight talks. You try silence too, hoping the absence of words might speak more clearly. But even then, the translation is never perfect. Meaning warps, intention fades. What you meant becomes what they heard. This is why loneliness doesn't always come from being alone. It often comes from being surrounded, yet unseen. From laughing at the right moment and nodding in the right places, while a part of you whispers, they still don't know me. And maybe they never will. Because even you don't fully know yourself. You're a story being written and revised in real time, a shifting constellation of moods, memories, and masks. How could someone else pin that down when you can't? But here's the strange, aching beauty of it all. You're not alone in feeling alone. Everyone is wandering through their own untranslatable life, hoping to brush against something real. And sometimes, for a moment, the translation is good enough. A look, a gesture, a sentence that lands just right. It's not perfect, but it's something. And maybe that's all we get. Fragments of understanding in a world built on mystery. Brief collisions of recognition in an ocean of misinterpretation. Enough to keep trying. Enough to keep reaching. Because even if no one ever fully understands you, someone might still see you trying to be understood. And sometimes, that's where the deepest empathy begins. Your strengths come from fear. There's a kind of praise that hides a shadow. They tell you you're disciplined, focused, relentless, that you're the rock others can lean on, that your work ethic is unshakable. And maybe they're right. Maybe you do show up, no matter what. Maybe you do get things done when no one else can. But deep down, you know something they don't. You weren't born strong. You were shaped by fear. Fear of not being enough, of being left behind, of being overlooked or abandoned or humiliated. Fear of what happens if you slow down, if you stop performing, if you let the mask slip for a second too long. So you overcompensate. You become the reliable one, the overachiever, the protector, the one who never complains. And it works. You earn respect. You win approval. People call you resilient, as if you were forged in fire and came out stronger. But the truth is, you're still burning. Your strength didn't come from peace. It came from pressure, from the silent terror of not being safe unless you excel, from growing up too fast, from realizing early that love might be conditional and that praise is easier to earn than genuine understanding. So you adapt. You learn to anticipate danger before it arrives. You read the room like your survival depends on it, because once, maybe it did. You become the peacemaker, the planner, the perfectionist. You do everything in your power to stay useful, needed, admired, because then maybe you'll be safe. But this kind of strength has a cost. It exhausts you. It isolates you. It traps you in roles you never chose but feel unable to abandon. You fear rest because rest feels like weakness. You fear vulnerability because vulnerability feels like failure. And worst of all, you fear healing because if your strength came from damage, who are you without the wounds? It's a hard question, one most people never ask, because the world doesn't reward self-reflection. It rewards results. It applauds your ability to carry the weight without showing strain. And you've carried so much for so long, you've started to believe that carrying it is your identity. But maybe it isn't. Maybe your truest strength isn't in how much pain you can endure, but in your willingness to finally set it down, to stop proving and start existing, to realize that you deserve care, not just because you're useful, but because you're human. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest strength is not born from fear at all, but from the quiet defiance of choosing to live differently. Still, it's hard to shake the pattern. Fear is a powerful sculptor. It carves deep, and even when the world around you calms down, the echoes inside keep ringing. So you keep striving, keep showing up, keep wearing strength like armor. But beneath that armor, something softer waits. Not weakness, but freedom. And yet, just as you begin to imagine what that freedom might feel like, what it might mean to drop the script you've always followed, you realize something else. You've been playing a part so well for so long that somewhere along the way, you started to believe you were the lead. You're not the main character. You walk into a crowded room and feel the weight of every glance. You analyze the way someone shifted their posture, the pause in a conversation, the glance that didn't land. You assume they're thinking about you, judging, admiring, resenting, noticing. But here's the truth. No one says out loud, they're not. You're not the main character. Not in their story. Not in the world's. Most people are too consumed with their own anxieties to hold on to anyone else's. Your triumphs might ripple outward for a moment, but even the loudest splash fades into silence faster than you think. It sounds harsh, but it's liberating too. The spotlight you imagine shining on your every move, it isn't real. No one's keeping score of your stumbles. No one's tallying your awkward laughs or missteps. Most people aren't watching you because they're too busy wondering if you're watching them. That's the illusion of the stage. We all think we're on it. It begins early. Stories, movies, even memories, everything gets filtered through your own perspective. You live inside your head. So of course it feels like a narrative with you at the center. Every minor conflict feels like a plot point. Every heartbreak feels like the climax. Every compliment is a rising action. Every mistake a turning point. But life isn't a novel written just for you. It's an anthology, scattered and unsynchronized. In someone else's story, you're a background extra, a passing line, a memory half remembered. And yet, we live like protagonists. We seek arcs, character growth, poetic justice. We wait for someone to reveal the hidden purpose behind our struggles, as if pain must be meaningful to be real, as if the universe owes us a well-written redemption. But the world isn't a movie. There's no narrator tying it all together. There's no audience gasping at your lows or cheering your highs. There's just this moment, then the next, then the next. Unscripted, unscored. And that realization, it can feel hollow, like something's been taken away. But look again. Freedom hides in the silence. Because if you're not the main character, then the pressure lifts. You don't have to perform. You don't have to turn every moment into significance. You can just live imperfectly, quietly, freely. It doesn't mean your life has no meaning. It means the meaning is yours to invent, not handed to you by some unseen storyteller, but carved gently from the raw material of your choices. And maybe, in this sea of a billion narratives, the most honest thing you can do is stop trying to be the star and start learning to share the light. But the spotlight, even if imaginary, leaves a glow on your skin, and walking away from it feels like surrender. Yet deep down, a whisper insists. You were never meant to be watched. You were meant to transform. Not into someone bigger, but someone deeper. And transformation, it turns out, doesn't always come from glory. Sometimes it comes from hurt, from pieces you thought you buried long ago that slowly rearrange themselves into something unrecognizable, something quietly, painfully new. Growth is just reorganizing pain. You tell yourself you've grown, that you're stronger now, wiser, more resilient. You look back on the chaos of who you used to be and feel a kind of pride, as if you climbed out of something, as if you overcame. But sit with that feeling long enough, and you might notice something else. You didn't escape the pain. You rearranged it. The fear that used to scream now whispers in decisions you don't question. The heartbreak that once shattered you has become your filter for trust. The insecurity that burned through your early years now hides beneath overachievement or perfectionism. It's all still there, just better dressed. Growth doesn't always mean healing. Sometimes it means making the wound livable. Because survival is clever. When something hurts too much, the mind doesn't always fix it. It reroutes. It builds scaffolding around the damage. You don't forget the pain. You just stop visiting it directly. Instead, you build a personality, a worldview, a life strategy, all designed to protect that sore spot. And the world applauds you for it. You're doing so well, they say. You're thriving. But no one sees the cost. No one sees how your calm is partly numbness, how your confidence is stitched together with anxiety, how your success is fueled not by joy, but by the quiet terror of ever feeling that helpless again. We call it growth, but maybe it's more honest to call it what it is. A careful arrangement of pain, a reordering of scars into something functional, something that passes as whole. And that's not a failure. It's human. It's how we continue. But the danger lies in forgetting, in believing the new structure means the pain is gone, in thinking the walls we've built are us and not just what we built to survive. Real growth, the kind that liberates, often begins when the old strategies stop working. When the overthinking no longer protects you, when the avoidance begins to cost too much, when the mask you wore for safety starts suffocating you, that's when a deeper question appears. Not how have I changed, but what have I been protecting? And behind that question waits a truth few are ready for, that healing doesn't always feel like progress. Sometimes it feels like unraveling, like letting go of the very things that kept you afloat. Like visiting the wounds you've expertly avoided and saying, I see you now, I'm not running anymore. It's slow, it's frightening. It doesn't look impressive from the outside, but it's real. Because true growth isn't just rearranging pain, it's integrating it, listening to it, letting it transform you not into someone who hides better, but someone who no longer has to. And yet, even after all this, we still long to be seen, to be witnessed not as who we perform to be, but as we actually are. But being seen is a risk, because what if they look and still don't know you? Being seen isn't being known. You walk into the room, and their eyes find you. They smile, nod. Maybe they compliment your clothes, or your posture, or the story you told last week. You feel noticed. A little surge of warmth moves through you, the kind that says, I exist, I matter. But as the night unfolds, you begin to feel hollow, like a painting on display. They see your gestures, your tone, your carefully chosen words, but not the questions you didn't ask, not the ache behind your smile, not the parts of you you've trained to stay silent because they never seemed welcome. Being seen is not the same as being known. Most of what people respond to is the projection you offer them, a curated version, polished in the right places, blurred in others. Even your vulnerability gets dressed up, shared at a safe distance, in a tone that makes it palatable. You confess in ways that don't threaten the image. You say I'm struggling with just enough poise that it still earns praise. And that's the trap. You start mistaking recognition for understanding. You assume being perceived means being understood. But attention is easy to capture. Understanding requires something else: depth, stillness, presence. Most people don't make it that far, not because they don't care, but because they're stuck inside their own performances too. So you perform for each other, two masks nodding in agreement. And yet, something inside you keeps hoping, keeps asking, if I drop the act, if I showed them the parts that aren't practiced, aren't flattering, aren't even coherent, would they stay? You fear the answer, because deep down you know many wouldn't. Not because they're cruel, but because what you carry can't always be met by what they're capable of seeing. To be known, truly known, is terrifying. It means risking rejection not of your persona, but of your essence. It means letting someone walk through the cluttered back rooms of your mind, past the polished foyer. And yet, you crave it. That rare moment when someone mirrors back, not what you're projecting, but what you've hidden even from yourself. When someone notices the hesitation behind your laugh, or the grief in your silence. When someone asks the question that makes your mask crack, not to expose you but to join you behind it. That kind of knowing is rare, but it's real, and it doesn't always come from those you expect. Sometimes a stranger notices. Sometimes a quiet glance from someone across the room sees more than years of conversation. Sometimes a piece of music knows you better than your oldest friend. But more often than not, people love what you give them, not what you are. And that realization comes next. They love what you give them. They laugh at your jokes. They thank you for being so supportive. They call you the strong one, the funny one, the one who always shows up. And a part of you believes it because they're not lying. You do offer those things. You give, you hold, you lighten the mood, you listen. But late at night, when the room is quiet and the noise of performance dies down, something lingers, a hollow feeling, a question. If you stopped giving, would they still stay? Would they still reach out if you had nothing to offer that day? No comfort, no insight, no light to shine into their shadows. If you were the one who needed holding, would they know how to catch you, or would they just drift? You realize something painful. Many people don't love you. They love what you provide. They love how they feel when they're around you. Your presence becomes a utility, a soothing balm, a convenient mirror for their own identity. They love the way you validate them. They love the safety you offer. They love the you who makes them feel seen. But that's not the same as loving you, because they don't know what exhausts you, what you never say, the emotional bills that pile up behind the scenes, the quiet moments you wish someone would just ask you how you're doing and stay long enough to mean it. Love built on service is fragile. It feels warm until you stop performing, and then silence. You try to convince yourself it's normal, Everyone has their role. Everyone gives in different ways. But deep down, you want something truer. Someone who notices when your smile doesn't reach your eyes. Someone who sees your worth in your stillness, not just in your utility. But that kind of love isn't loud. It doesn't rush in with grand gestures. It waits. It watches. It lingers when you fall apart. The tragedy is, many people never get to find out who you are without the giving, because you never stop. You're so good at holding everyone else up that no one realizes you're drowning. And when you finally do stop, when you finally collapse, it confuses them, as if your humanity is a betrayal of the image they had of you. You feel guilty for needing, for withdrawing, for not being yourself. But that guilt is just the echo of a love that was never whole. And maybe that's the secret no one tells you. Real love doesn't come from what you give. It survives what you take away. It grows in the silences between performances. It whispers, "I see you," when there's nothing left to offer. Still, it's hard not to notice how much easier it is to be loved when you're useful. And how terrifying it is to ask whether you'd still be loved if you were nothing at all. You push the thought down. You return the message. You make them laugh again. And the wheel keeps turning until one day the laughter doesn't reach you. The giving becomes a reflex. The joy dulls into routine, and the days begin to blur. Because when love becomes performance, numbness isn't a possibility. It's a consequence. Time speeds up when you're numb. It's not just a feeling. It's a distortion. You glance at the clock and wonder how it's already dark. You look back on the week and struggle to remember what even happened. The days feel shorter. The hours blur. Time moves, but it no longer passes through you. It just slips by, untouched. You're not in pain. Not exactly. You're not crying or breaking down, but you're not really alive either. You're numb, muted, somewhere between effort and absence. And that's when time accelerates. Because emotion is an anchor. Joy, grief, awe, even boredom. These stretch moments out, give them weight. They leave fingerprints on your memory. When you're fully present, time bends around you. Seconds breathe. Minutes linger. Hours etch themselves into experience. But numbness flattens everything. You go through the motions. Wake up, work, eat, scroll, sleep, again, again, again. Nothing cuts through. No moment feels real enough to hold. So your mind skips, like a record with no needle. You blink, and it's next month. The scariest part? You often don't notice it happening until a whole season is gone. Numbness isn't always dramatic. It's not a gray rain cloud dragging you down. It's more like a soft fog, gently erasing the edges of everything. Conversations still happen, tasks still get done, but nothing lands. It's like watching your life through glass, or worse, forgetting to watch it all. And when time speeds up, so does regret. You miss chances. You drift from people. You wake up to find the relationships you meant to water have withered. You realize the things you wanted to change never did, not because you chose otherwise, but because you never chose at all. You floated, and the world rewards that. In subtle ways, you're praised for your composure, for your reliability, for how well you manage. But no one notices the cost that your life is running on autopilot, and you're barely there to witness it. And maybe that's why the numb survive so long unnoticed, because they smile, because they function, because they don't scream when the years vanish. But there's something haunting in the realization that you don't remember your own story, that you lived it without feeling it. And the longer you're numb, the faster it goes, until you're left with fragments. Weeks that feel like minutes, a decade that feels like a sigh. You start to wonder, how much of your life are you going to miss while you're still here? And that thought alone can jolt you, just for a moment, back into the present. But just as quickly, your focus slips again. The loop resumes. Your hand scrolls, your eyes glaze, and time, ever obedient, begins to run. Faster now. You want to stop it, to slow the reel. But something keeps dragging you just behind the now, half a second late, half a thought behind. You trail behind your thoughts. There's a delay you never notice. Not in the internet, or your phone, or even your reflexes, but in yourself, a strange lag, like your awareness is always arriving, a few seconds too late to the moment, like your thoughts are already moving, and you're just chasing after them, trying to make sense of where they've been. You walk into a room, forget why, then remember halfway through leaving. You say something in a conversation, and only afterward wonder what you meant. You make a decision, and the justification shows up later, like a polite assistant who missed the meeting. You are not the conductor of your mind. You're the narrator, arriving after the music's already begun. That lag is more than just a quirk. It's a glimpse into something deeper, that what you call you, your conscious self, isn't driving the train. It's reading the script after the scene is filmed. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You'll catch yourself mid-thought and wonder, where did that come from? You'll observe a reaction inside you, an emotion, a bias, a choice, and realize it landed before you even looked. You're not thinking, you're noticing thoughts. Not feeling, but witnessing feelings that seem to sprout without permission. And the strangest part, you still believe you're in charge. You say things like, "I've decided," or "I've realized," as if you were the one making the choice. But what if decisions happen first, and you only dress them up afterward? What if your mind writes the story, and your awareness just narrates it with a confident voiceover? You aren't the author. You're the summary. This realization is both terrifying and freeing, because it shatters the illusion of perfect control, but it also softens the shame, the pressure, the blame. If you're always a few seconds behind your own thoughts, then self-awareness isn't a weapon to use against yourself. It's a flashlight, one that reveals the machinery and how much of it runs in shadows. But this delay has a cost. It means you rarely feel fully in the moment. Even when you're here, part of you is catching up. A voice in your mind is still explaining what just happened, still framing your role, still patching over cracks in logic and gaps in memory. It's like chasing your own echo. And sometimes when you finally arrive, when you're fully present, it's already too late. The words are spoken, the gesture is made, the silence is broken. You watch the film of your life, just a step behind, mouthing the lines you already lived. And that delay? It doesn't just shape how you experience yourself. It also shapes how you experience joy, because joy happens in flashes, in seconds that don't wait. If you're always catching up, then even the happiest moments can feel like echoes, reverberations of something you missed in real time. And eventually, you begin to wonder, how much of your life are you actually living, and how much are you just remembering too late? Every joy has an expiration. You don't realize the moment is perfect until it's already fading. You're laughing with someone, your face aches, the air feels electric, and for a heartbeat you forget everything. But even then, something in the back of your mind whispers that it won't last. And just like that, the moment is already beginning to die. Every joy you've ever felt has a timestamp, not because the joy was fake, but because the container holding it was temporary. The people, the place, the version of you that could feel it. That's the cruel truth of happiness. It's not something you can possess. It's something you pass through. And by the time you try to grasp it, it's already dissolving in your hands. Think back to the things that once lit you up, your favorite toys, your first love, the song that made your chest tighten. They still exist in some form, but they don't work the same way. The chemicals have changed, the magic expired. You've changed. You don't grow out of joy. You shed it like skin. But the mind doesn't like that. So it tries to recreate. It revisits. It clings to nostalgia like it's a ladder back to something golden. But the more you chase a feeling, the more it resists you, like trying to dream the same dream twice. And when you do manage to return, when you go back to the city, the person, the memory, it feels like visiting a film set. Everything's still there. but the soul is missing. Because joy isn't stored in the object. It's not in the photograph or the place or even the person. It's in a convergence, a fragile alignment of mood, meaning, context, and self. Change any one of those, and the joy collapses like a star at the end of its life. This is why happiness, when clung to, becomes suffering. You try to hold on. You plan the trip, take the picture, make the playlist rituals to capture the moment, like fireflies in a jar. But the jar is made of time, and time leaks. Even the happiest people walk through a minefield of endings. Every peak is a prelude to descent. Every celebration is edged with goodbye. Even in laughter, your nervous system knows what's coming. The fall, the silence, the slow retreat of color. And still, you chase it. Still, you believe you'll find the thing. The feeling that finally sticks. The relationship that never dulls. The version of you that never stops glowing. But it never quite arrives. Or if it does, it doesn't stay. Because joy, at its core, is a process. It breathes, it flares, and then it burns out. Maybe that's why the most beautiful moments are the ones you don't photograph, the ones you never post, the ones that live only in the blur between inhale and exhale. They weren't built to be remembered. They were built to vanish. But if you knew that, if you really knew that, would you stop reaching, or would you learn to love joy for what it is? A flicker, a spark in the dark, a whisper that says, "This is good for now." And in that whisper, you begin to notice something else too, something quieter than nostalgia, more haunting than memory. It's the realization that you were changing through it all, that with each joy lost, something else was shifting. Your voice, your mind, your skin. And then you see a reflection, and it hits you like a glitch in a dream. You've been mourning lost joy, but never noticed what else disappeared along the way. Your face changed without you. You catch your reflection and hesitate. It's not that you look bad, or even unfamiliar. It's that something in the expression doesn't quite match the person you think you are. The curve of the mouth feels older than your thoughts. The eyes seem to hold a story you don't remember living. And just for a moment, you wonder who's looking at who. Because while you were busy surviving, working, worrying, waiting, your face kept evolving, not in the dramatic, obvious ways, but in the quiet accumulation of seconds, the kind of change that can't be seen from the inside. Tiny muscles settled into new patterns, tension etched itself into your jawline, smiles rewrote your cheeks, frowns, your brow, sleep shaped your eyelids, pain pressed into your posture, and you weren't consulted. No one told you when your default face would shift, or that your resting expression might one day reflect a sadness you've never confessed, or that joy might appear muted, even when you feel it fiercely. Your face is a history you didn't know you were writing. It records what you endure, but not always what you understand. You may have healed from heartbreak, but your eyes still carry its echo. You may have forgiven, but your jaw clenches at the memory. You may have grown wiser, but your reflection keeps asking, at what cost? And yet, this isn't just about time. It's about ownership. You think your face belongs to you, but in so many moments, it belongs to someone else's gaze, a teacher's approval, a stranger's judgment, a lover's disappointment. Their reactions trained you to smile a certain way, to hide your anger, to soften your defiance. Over years, those tiny adjustments became permanent. So now, when you look in the mirror, you're not just seeing you, you're seeing a collage of survival strategies, a sculpture shaped by expectations you forgot you were trying to meet. And still, you wear it, day after day, because what choice do you have? This is the face the world recognizes. The one that greets friends, unlocks phones, appears in photos, carries your name. But it's also the one that sometimes doesn't feel quite real, like an actor left on stage long after the audience has gone home, still holding a pose, still delivering lines, still pretending to be the person everyone remembers. You wonder when that started, when your face began to age without asking you, when it started telling stories you didn't choose, when it started holding emotions you thought you buried. And maybe the strangest part is this: it keeps changing. Even now, as you read this, as you think, as you blink, a micro-expression, a twitch of muscle, a shift in light, another pixel in the portrait. One day you'll look again, and something will be different, just slightly, just enough. And once again you'll feel the distance between who you were, who you are, and the reflection still trying to keep up. But the change doesn't stop at skin. Beneath every subtle shift in expression lies something deeper. Not just the story of your life, but the shadows you've inherited, the moods that aren't entirely yours, the heaviness that started elsewhere, yet somehow took root in your own bones. Your pain isn't fully yours. There's a weight you carry that doesn't feel quite earned, a tension in your shoulders that doesn't trace back to a single event, a sadness that visits without cause, an anger that flares up faster than the moment deserves. You tell yourself it's just stress, hormones, overthinking. But what if that pain isn't entirely yours? What if some of it began in someone else? Science has a word for this now: epigenetics. The way trauma imprints itself not just on the mind, but on the body, passed down like a silent echo through generations. Children born after war, famine, or oppression often carry heightened stress responses, despite never experiencing the events themselves, as if the body remembers what the mind cannot. But long before science gave it a name, cultures felt it. Stories whispered through bloodlines: the son who flinches like his father, the daughter who cries with her grandmother's sorrow, the weight of silence passed from mother to child like an heirloom, invisible, intimate, inescapable. You feel it in your reactions that seem too strong, in grief that outlives its reason, in fears that don't belong to your life but still shape your decisions, the urge to flee even when you're safe, the guilt for joy that hasn't been punished yet, the expectation of abandonment even in love that's never failed you. And we internalize it. We call it ours. But pain that isn't fully yours is the hardest to heal, because you can't name its source, can't point to the moment it began, can't argue with it, because it didn't start with a lie you believed, but with a feeling that was passed down like language, like posture, like breath. And so you carry ghosts in your nervous system. Not metaphorically, literally. The cortisol patterns of your ancestors, the flinch responses of your lineage, the heartbreaks of people you never met, etched into the way your body prepares for loss. You were born into a story already in motion, and part of growing up is realizing that not every page in that story is yours to keep. Some of it was never meant for you, but you still have to hold it until you learn how to set it down gently, without shame. There's power in naming this, in seeing that your pain isn't weakness, but inheritance, that you aren't broken, you're echoing, that your healing isn't selfish, it's sacred, because when you heal pain that didn't start with you, it often ends with you. But even this realization doesn't offer full escape, because the echoes still linger in reflexes, in thoughts you didn't choose, in dreams that don't belong to your memory. And sometimes, just when you think you've moved past them, they rise again, disguised as hesitation, self-doubt, or déjà vu. And so the work continues. Not to erase what's been passed down, but to recognize what's yours to keep and what you were never meant to carry in the first place. But even as you sift through the inherited weight, you start to notice something else. A pattern that plays out again and again. Not just across generations, but within the span of your own life. Different faces, different places, same pain, same mistake, same moment on repeat, like time is trying to teach you something you still refuse to learn. You repeat the same mistakes. It starts the same way every time. You tell yourself this time will be different. You've grown, you've learned, you've seen the pattern and stepped outside of it. But then, without warning, You're standing in the same emotional wreckage. Different details, same ruin. You swear you chose better, but somehow the mistake chose you. Maybe it's a relationship that ends the way the last one did, or a job you take, full of red flags you justify again, or an argument with yourself you've already had 100 times. One where you lose every time you look back and see the warning signs. The same ones. Always. And a quiet horror sinks in. Because now the pain doesn't just sting, it mocks. You're not just hurting, you're haunted by the realization that this isn't new pain. It's old pain wearing a new face, and you walked right back into its arms. Why? Maybe it's the way the brain works, wired for habit, safety, predictability. We choose the familiar, even when it wounds us, because repetition feels like control. Even if it hurts, it's our hurt. A story we know the ending to, there's comfort in that. Or maybe it's deeper. Maybe mistakes aren't just slip-ups, but signals. Maybe we repeat them because part of us is still trying to master the moment that first broke us, like a scratched record trying to play the same song correctly, over and over again, hoping this time the melody won't skip. But it does. Because healing doesn't come from reenactment. It comes from seeing clearly, painfully, where the loop began, what wound it protects, what fear it feeds. And that requires stepping out of your own timeline, watching yourself not as the victim, but as the echo. That's hard. Because self-awareness doesn't stop the cycle. Sometimes it makes it worse. Now you're repeating the mistake and hating yourself for it. Now you're not just lost, you're ashamed. And shame is glue. It traps you inside the pattern it pretends to punish. But here's the secret. Repetition isn't failure. It's persistence. It's your psyche refusing to give up on something unresolved, like a ghost that keeps returning until it's heard. Every mistake you repeat is trying to show you something about your needs, your fears, your hidden loyalties to pain. You are not broken for looping. You're alive for noticing. The moment you ask, why does this keep happening? That's the crack. That's where change sneaks in. Not loudly, not with fireworks, but quietly, like a hesitation before reacting, like a second thought before reaching out, like the silence that comes before a different answer. And no, that doesn't mean the cycle stops instantly. Most loops don't end. They unravel, slowly, in fragments. Sometimes the awareness alone is the first shift. A breath that wasn't there before. A choice that almost happened. And in those almosts, everything begins to change. You may still repeat the mistake, but this time, something will feel off, hollow, too predictable. And in that moment, you'll pause, even just for a second. And that second is enough. Enough to see it. Enough to feel tired of it. Enough to finally want something else. And when that moment comes, a new kind of question takes root. Not about the past, not about the pain, but about the path, the why, the reason you keep walking toward what breaks you, and whether that reason was ever real at all. Purpose might be a fiction. There's a moment, often quiet and unannounced, where you stop and ask the one question you've spent your life trying not to say out loud. What is all this for? You can be mid-career, halfway through a conversation, or brushing your teeth, and suddenly it hits, like a curtain pulling back. The script you've followed, the achievements, the goals, they all feel strangely hollow, not wrong, just fabricated. As if someone handed you a map for a treasure that doesn't exist. And here's the terrifying thought. Maybe they did. Maybe purpose, the thing we chase with such urgency and devotion, is a story, not a discovery, but a design. A frame we place over chaos to make it bearable. To survive the unbearable fact that we're here, conscious and finite, spinning on a rock with no known author. You're told from a young age, find your passion, follow your calling, do what you're meant to do. But who said you were meant to do anything? Who whispered that there was a path waiting just for you? Who promised that the puzzle had a picture when finished? No one. Not really. Purpose might be a fiction, crafted not to deceive, but to soothe. A human-shaped answer to an inhuman-sized question. The universe doesn't speak in meaning. It speaks in forces, particles, silence. We're the ones who translate it into missions and dreams and 5-year plans. And it works. Most of the time, purpose gives shape to pain, direction to effort. It helps us endure the senseless because we've assigned it a sense. But there's a danger in believing the fiction is truth. When the job ends, when the relationship dies, when the goal is reached and still something's missing, you begin to panic. As if the purpose failed you. As if your compass is broken. But what if there was never a compass? What if meaning isn't found, but made? Not discovered in some hidden corner of the cosmos, but crafted moment by moment, out of what you choose to value. That idea feels freeing to some, but for others, it's too much. If purpose isn't real, then why try? Why wake up early? Why fight for anything at all? But perhaps that's the wrong question. Perhaps the power isn't in whether purpose is real, but in how deeply you decide to care anyway. Because even fiction can be holy. Even a myth, believed together, can build civilizations. Purpose might be a story, but if you live it well, love others through it, create meaning inside it, does it matter that it was invented? Maybe the real tragedy isn't that purpose is a fiction. Maybe it's that we keep waiting for someone else to write it for us. And as that realization settles in, as the scaffolding of inherited meaning dissolves, you begin to see something else, a deeper silence. Not empty, but open, a blank page, not a void. One that asks a new kind of question. If you knew no one was watching, would you still build something beautiful? And if you did, would it still vanish just the same? You'll leave no real trace. Think of a city street, crowded, loud, forgettable. You walk past 100 strangers, each carrying a lifetime's secrets, dreams, heartbreaks, regrets, and yet none of them register. Their faces dissolve before the block ends, their names never spoken aloud, their presence already fading. One day that stranger was you, and one day soon it will be again. It's easy to believe we leave some kind of mark, that our lives ripple outward in meaningful waves, that the conversations we've had, the work we've done, the people we've touched, will preserve a piece of us after we're gone. But look closer. Even the most beloved are eventually forgotten. Even the most brilliant are reduced to dates on a stone, footnotes in a book, echoes in the voice of someone who misquotes them. Your favorite childhood toy? Likely donated or discarded. Your earliest social media posts? Lost in a digital graveyard of platforms that no longer exist. The rooms you've cried in, laughed in, kissed in, painted over, recarpeted, rented by someone who will never know your name. And someday, your name too will be unfamiliar. Your photos will sit in a folder no one opens. Your words will be read without your voice. Eventually, no one alive will remember how you moved, how you looked when you were thinking, how your laugh sounded when you really meant it. This isn't meant to depress you. It's just a peeling back of a comforting illusion, one we all share, that our existence somehow guarantees a legacy, that by doing enough, caring enough, striving hard enough, we can outlast our own mortality. But the truth is quieter and darker. You'll be forgotten. Not out of cruelty, not because you weren't loved, but because forgetting is the nature of time. Even the stars we see at night are lies told by light. Many of them are already gone. We're looking at ghosts, and someday someone might look at you the same way, a picture, a diary entry, a traced memory, and think they understand, but they won't, not really. Because the person you were can't be preserved. Not fully. Not faithfully. And even if the facts remain, the feeling won't. The heat of your presence, the pulse of your thought, the ache behind your smile, those fade first. But maybe there's a kind of beauty in that. Maybe the fact that you vanish is what makes your presence sacred. Maybe the point was never to be remembered, but to be real. To live deeply in the fleeting. To love people who will forget you. To create moments that no one records. To whisper meaning into a world that doesn't echo it back. That might be the only real trace we ever leave, if not on the world, then in ourselves. And when it's all gone, when your name no longer matters, maybe what remains isn't you at all, but the space you made while you were here. A breath, a light, a story that ends mid-sentence. And maybe that's enough. Some truths arrive quietly, not with thunder but with a whisper that lingers long after the sound has faded. Maybe that's what these dark truths are. Not warnings, not lessons, but mirrors, strange and silent. Asking not for answers, but for awareness. If something in you stirred tonight, a question you can't unask, a feeling you can't quite name, let it stay, let it stretch, let it move through you like a dream, half remembered but impossible to forget. And if you found this journey worth taking, consider leaving a light behind. A like, a comment, a share. Let someone else stumble into the same shadows and find something of themselves there. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time. Stay curious, stay awake, even as you fall asleep.